Hello. How's it going, guys? I am Cole. This is Jay. And once again, we're in the movie discussion pocket dimension where the only thing that matters is film and time does not exist. And we're continuing on with our somewhat ambitious series on covering the new Hollywood era. This will be the first installment that really gets to kind of the guts of it, or one of the big significant moments of it, I guess, in that we kind of did it in a roundabout way. Our opening movie was Targets, which was certainly a part of the movement, but was a lesser known movie, even though it was by one of the sort of pioneering directors of the movement, Bogdanovich. But still, he would be known for movies that came afterwards rather than Targets. But we thought Targets was sort of a cool thing to focus on, just because we thought it was sort of overlooked and had some elements that definitely fit into the whole New Hollywood movement. Then we backtracked to a movie that predated New Hollywood and didn't come out of Hollywood, the Italian-British film Blow Up from 1966, because as we said, we're going to do at least a couple more like that are foreign films that came before that helped to inspire the movement going forward. And so now what we knew we wanted to do one of the ones of the big ones, as we said, from the late 60s, where it was definitely understood the movement got going, and we really couldn't decide which to pick, so we made a poll, and you, the viewers, helped us out. And what it came down to was 1967's The Graduate, as directed by Mike Nichols, based on the novel of the same name by Charles Webb. A very famous movie to this day, has an indelible mark on cinema and pop culture in general. I'm sure even plenty of people that haven't seen the movie are very familiar with it, what it's about, or some of the stuff that was in it. It's been almost endlessly parodied. We've seen all sorts of stuff. Wayne's World 2 does a bit of it. You see the Family Guy, The Simpsons, all sorts of stuff. There was an SNL sketch that did a bit of it a little while ago.
Yeah.
You name it, and it's usually it's the ending scene. That's the big one that gets parodied, and we'll get to that part. But so as we said before, this was the transition from the old Hollywood and coming into the 60s, where things would change very dramatically. A big part of that would be this new generation of actors, writers, directors that were film school educated, and also finally being given the freedom to put stuff on the screen that hadn't really been done before. They were restricted by various censors as far as more mature content, or even just the suggestion of them sometimes, as far as stuff like sexuality, violence, political, social things, etc. And this one, it falls under the sort of the relationship / sexuality type thing, I guess. Also, coming out in 1967, a lot of people point to this film as being sort of the first film, at least a serious film, like not counting maybe teeny bopper type films, that was like aimed specifically at the baby boomer generation, who were basically in their mid-teens to mid-20s, depending on how you define that generation, because the movie is very much about centers on a character that would be considered one of them, although he's actually played by somebody a little bit older in that Dustin Hoffman, as we'll get to. Dustin Hoffman is about 30 here, and he looks 30 to me, I have to say, playing a 20-year-old. But there's a whole thing about the ages in this movie that we can get into later and stuff. But anyway, this was a movie that was considered like a serious, even though it had comedic elements, and we'll say it was to me, it seems like an early example of a comedy drama. When I think about it, like I try to think of other comedy dramas that predate it, and I kind of come up short. It was kind of more like, well, it was either a comedy or a drama. You didn't really see them mix as much. I think this is another one of those moments where this sort of started that trend too. And but anyway, despite the comedic elements, was still considered a serious film and stuff, and very much aimed at that generation. And it was a resounding success. If you take inflation into account, it's one of the highest grossing films of all time. Wow. And did I think it would be something like 22nd on the list, and it just did, it just did gangbusters. And of course, it launched the career of Dustin Hoffman quite spectacularly. You think around 30 is a little late. Well, better late than never. And throughout the 70s, 80s, and right up to today, a very busy actor, a very respected actor, and he's had a very good career. And this is really the movie that started it all for him.
Yeah.
But so I wanted to ask you, how how far back in your life did you see this movie? Like, how old were you?
It wasn't that long ago, man. Maybe 5, 6 years ago.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember too, and part of me thinks that it was probably early 20s. I just sort of felt finally the impetus to see the movie because well, it's sort of about the people, in my age range,
Right.
years ago, but so I should see it and stuff. And I've seen it probably 3 or 4 times over the last 10 plus years. And this most recent viewing is probably the one that I got the most out of. Maybe it has to do with aging, maybe it has to do with maybe being more mature, or how I look at film and blah blah blah. But this is the
Mm.
most I've enjoyed it. It was a movie that I used to consistently underwhelm me, and I'd say, oh, it's kind of a generational thing. I think it's kind of aged poorly, and I think it's being propped up on a pedestal, and whereas somebody like of my age or even a little bit older or younger, it's like sees like how it's kind of aged. Um, I still kind of see that, but less so now. Now, I'm what I mean is I'm higher on the movie used to be. I feel more positive. I kind of see more of the good things that critics and people point out before that I was sort of mm, I won't say I wasn't denying them, but I was sort of I would diminish them a little bit. I'd be like, yeah, I guess it's good, but this is probably the most positive I felt about it. This fresh watching, I kind of get more so now. Like, it's impossible to put yourself in a different time and place, but I kind of understand why it was almost sort of a bit of a, I don't know if cultural phenomenon is too strong of a word, but it certainly had made a very strong impact, and you know influenced film and actors and stuff going forward for many years. And now I finally kind of I get it a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, it's. I think the older I get, the less I can, relate to Dustin Hoffman's character, and the just he does a lot of stupid things, and he's
Hmm.
kind of like the I don't know, uh, what would you call him, the anti-hero, or I mean,
That is an interesting. Yeah, I mean, he's sort of like an early softer version of antihero, and that
uh,
the if you want to say he does bad things or wrong things, it's not necessarily on purpose. It's more like he's an antihero because he's a flawed hero more so than he's
yeah,
like a hero that's going against the grain. But yeah, I'd have to say that the core of his character is easily the biggest thing for me watching the movie. Like you said, where one moment I strongly relate to him, and another moment I don't at all.
right.
It's kind of how it works for me because he
Well,
does have a lot of qualities that I still have, and that I recognize in my younger self
yeah,
when I was around that time. But then he'll do something that seems to be directly, against that,
hmm
which I find a little confusing, and I don't know if that's them trying to make a realistic character, or if that's just the writing fighting against itself, as sometimes you see in movies when you think a character acts inconsistently.
yeah. Well, on this viewing, I noticed more than ever that you've just got this rich kid just kind of moping around his mansion for a large majority of the movie, talking about "woe is me, my life is so bad." It's just it's kind of hard to feel sorry for someone who, basically the things he's sad about are all his direct, cause anyway.
Yeah,
It's
I mean, you can certainly sympathize that his parents are basically empty, shallow people, and all these
sure,
other people are too. But the difference is, you could feel sorry for him if he was a kid growing up in this. But now he's not a kid anymore, so I don't think you need to elicit that much sympathy for him anymore. Because when you get to
yeah,
this age, you don't really have to be held back by your parents. But of course, a big part of the movie is he and Elaine are both, they're young adults, but they're adults, and they're
right,
both having their lives controlled by their parents, even into
hmm
adulthood, which
hmm
is a big part of the movie, and what it's saying. A big part of the movie is the relationship between parents and children, and the generations, etc. But as you say, like he's hmm, it's not so much that he's supposed to be sympathetic, except that I think he's supposed to be a bit of relatable too, because he's sort of like again this new breed of kid. He's universities have been around for a while by this point,
right,
more than 100 years, but still the nature of university had really changed, just like it has now from there. Like nowadays, again, you meet somebody in their mid 30s, that doesn't necessarily mean they're even now on their set career path. It seems to be getting later and later, and this is sort of like a new crossroads for a new generation, is the teaching as like being the aimless 20-something, but the aimless 20-something that actually has some sort of training or background, where if you go back far enough, that's not really the case. Anybody, your grandfather or whatever is always telling you stories about this or that. And what you're always getting is like, these people never had the formal training. And you're just thinking, wow, it was so easy to get a job back then. Like, I think about Stan Lee in the 30s. Stan Lee was like a 17-year-old gopher, which makes sense, right? Well, and that's what he was doing at comics that would come Marvel, Timely Comics. So he's where he belonged. He was at the bottom. He was the untrained. But what happened was when Jack Kirby and the other artist whose name I can't remember, or it'll come back to me later, quit when they ran out, and they didn't have any sort of editing department in between. They just said, okay, Stan, you can do this editing and stuff until we get someone. Right. And then they never did. Like, that just doesn't happen in today's world, the way things are structured. And I think what we see in this movie is sort of the beginning of that, where it's like, this North American life very much so is like, if you're going to have any sort of career and not just like have some dead-end job, you need formal education and formal training. You need to be on a path, and then there's all this other stuff. And we see what happens is this: he's part of that sort of that first generation that's on the path, but like a lot of us, has become a little bit lost, and he's sort of wondering what it means or what it's for. Is he just trying to please his parents, etc.? So I think that's another thing that made the movie new at the time. Was I think it was speaking to a generation that had kind of only just been invented, this idea of like the university trained young person, but who at this point their future still isn't assured, just because they've had this. And nowadays it's even more relatable. Like, you can get all sorts of degrees and things like that, and they don't necessarily set you up for anything. It all depends on so many factors. Whereas if you go back enough decades and stuff, things were, I never, and I don't want anybody to misunderstand me, because the one thing I hate as like a big history buff and snob is people just assuming that if you go back far enough, whether it's a sport or any sort of thing, like, well, it was simpler, it was easier, it was, that's a wrong way of thinking to me. It was different, but to just say it was simpler or not as complicated stuff is almost never the case. And this wasn't the case either. I'm not trying to say like, today's world is so much harder than before. I don't mean that, but all I mean is, I don't know, I've kind of lost myself there, but I'll come around back to it. But I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to say that, like a few decades before, say, Dustin Hoffman's character, it was so easy. It was more simple in a way, in that it was more limiting in a way too. Like, you didn't have the freedom, and as you said, he's lost and stuff, but it's also a certain amount of freedom too. It's because he has kind of too many choices in a way.
Right.
So it's sort of that.
His parents' wealth have allowed him to kind of sit around and ponder what he wants to do. Mm-hmm. Otherwise he would have to, go to work and wouldn't really have a lot of choice to, think about what he wants to do.
So, I mean, the movie could say a little bit more about class division. It doesn't really. It just sort of focuses on this one class, and it's like, here's the problems of the children of this class. And you get it. And like you said, though, it's hard to feel too sorry, because then there's the people of the class before where it's like, well, they can be unsure about their future too, but the difference is like they don't have the choices.
Right.
It's, it's do this or be out in the street,
It's, do you want to go to grad school? Do you want to go, start working? What does he want to do? Does he even say that in the film?
No, he never does.
Okay, I didn't think so, but
he never does.
But I know she asked him, the daughter, whatever her name is, asked him,
Elaine,
what are your plans? Are you going to grad school? And he's like, no. Mm-hmm. So he has no intention to go back to school.
Yeah, which does start a whole thing too, like because like I said, back then that would be seen with scorn by the older generation, but now like it's sort of commonplace, where somebody might have graduated their first 4 years of college or whatever, and now they're not sure what to do. The older people now will all say, oh well, you got to figure it out. If you say something like, I'm going to backpack around Europe, they go, you go right ahead, and stuff like that. Like, most of these people have different expectations now. They're like, oh, find it out. There's a little bit of that on here, except it's a different path, because what they're saying is, we want you to go to grad school or figure out your career path, But as far as relationships and stuff go, they're like, oh, go sow your wild oats, is what they're saying. They're saying, oh, you're young, have fun. So to me, it's a bit of a contradiction there, where they're saying, we want you to get serious, but you don't have to get serious about the other stuff.
Yeah. And that alone's got to be some sort of a new idea for that period of time.
I mean, one thing that almost hasn't changed though is if you're a younger person, I mean, even up to our time I was about 30, I still found this when I was talking to older people, is that they want to know like 3 things about you. And 2 of them sometimes cancel each other out because they would be work and school. So it's either work and or school, and then relationship. That's what they want to know. They want to know how school is going. If it's not school, how work is going. If you're out of school, what work you're going to do. And besides that, they want to know relationship. Are you seeing anybody? Blah, 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 because that's everything. And I can't tell you how fed up I got with that. And I really did not come from a family or a surrounding where I was even pressured that much. I'm not trying to complain because there's people, I'm just one of those people that sometimes feels the need to feel angst for the sake of angst. And I'll make no excuses or apologies about that. Sometimes it's just been my character and stuff, like, or I'll see somebody, even now being in my 30s and, seeing peers that are on more secure career paths, or they're married and they have kids and stuff. And I just think, oh, stupid world. The world's expectations is for me to settle down and blah, blah, blah. But the truth is, maybe that is, but no one's actually saying it to me.
Yeah.
I don't have older relatives going, when are you going to get married? They're not doing that to me. So, I should just shut up. But still, I still think that's very much shown in this movie, because that's what they want to know. If you're going to continue school, or what's the work, and hey, are you, where's the girlfriend, or have you thought about marriage and stuff? And
that's what a lot of conversations are with, pretty much everyone too. Those 3 things, maybe throw in the weather, and there you go.
Yeah, I know. And like, they don't want to hear me talking, about like my interests or stuff like that, and that's fine.
Yeah. What are your hobbies?
Yeah. But it's an interesting thing though, because he's making a stand as a person of that generation, saying, okay, I went to this, but I'm not necessarily going to go to grad school. I'm going to slam on the brakes here and figure things out. But then as his desperation for Elaine increases, he's like, oh, I'm just going to marry her.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to fit to me, because again, you think he'd be the type of person that would resist that, where his parents or whatever, like, oh, you should get married. He'd be like, oh, I'm 21, I shouldn't even be thinking about marriage. And yet, but I guess that is part of like sort of his desperation, is I have to marry her before somebody else does. And of course that was the parents' solution. Skipping to the end though, their parents was like, oh, we'll just marry her off to some guy she barely knows.
Or maybe what he's thinking is, I want to have sex with her, so I must marry her.
In that he's already been through the immorality of not only having premarital sex, but sex with a married woman.
Well, yeah, he really dealt with that well. It was almost hard to watch.
Which part? Or do you just mean in general?
Well, I mean, when he was, the whole Mrs. Robinson, like, the initial seduction, but then, after he actually sleeps with her, it's like, he does a great job with that role, that awkward.
Yeah, and that's really what got him the role, and what made them overlook that he was too old, and that also, he's Dustin Hoffman, he's short and Jewish and stuff, right? In the book, the character is described as a much more handsome type. Like, the fact that Mrs. Robinson wants to seduce him isn't really surprising, because he's supposed to be like a very good-looking. I'm not saying that Dustin Hoffman is like terrible looking in the movie, but he's not, he's not what the aesthetic standards at the time were thinking, right? So in the book, there's no reach there. It's just like, oh, she sees this fit, handsome young man. Well, of course she wants him. Again, not saying Dustin Hoffman isn't a degree of handsome in this movie, but he's got these other qualities that make it seem a little weirder. But he plays it up. But he plays it up so well. Dustin Hoffman himself said something like that he was grateful to Nichols, the director, for knowing he was wrong for the part, but casting him anyway and giving him a chance. I can't remember what exactly the quote was, but something like that. Oh, yes. As far as I'm concerned, Mike Nichols did a very courageous thing, casting me in a part that I was not right for, meaning I was Jewish. In fact, many of the reviews were negative. It was kind of a veiled anti-Semitism. I was called big-nosed in the reviews, a nasal voice.
Wow.
And I mean, yeah, back in the day, they would just do that. Because as we were saying about the new Hollywood era, this was another change. Hollywood was very white bread. It was waspy. Right. The stars of yesteryear, right into the early '60s, were all they were all cut from the same cloth. And one thing I don't think this is intentional on the movie's part, but I think that's interesting as part of that. So not only are we getting the new sort of break with that, introducing our Jewish star here, but also one thing that you might notice if you watch a lot of older movies, especially before the 60s, and it's dying out by now, is that you'll notice that a lot of these Americans have an accent that we don't hear anymore. And that's what's known as the mid-Atlantic or sometimes the transatlantic accent. And nowadays we just sort of hear it when an actor's using it, and the idea is to convey rich snob. Anytime you hear that, like in a cartoon or something, it means rich snob. But as far as people who actually speak that way, it's died out. That's because it's a different sort of accent. In the world, we think accents it has to do with where you are. It's geography. People in this part of the world, they have this accent, even though they speak the same language. You know, somebody speaks the language here and they speak it here, but because of they're in different areas, there's a different accent. Sometimes it's only slight, sometimes it's quite striking. The difference with the mid-Atlantic accent is it has nothing to do with region. In fact, and it has nothing to do with something you inherit like from your parents. It's a taught, learned accent, and it was taught in the U.S. in the first half of the 20th century, and it was a mark of people that were well educated and usually, you know, of the upper class. And this would be reflected, of course, in Hollywood. And you'd have all sorts of these stars like Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. They would speak it very clearly, and even people that had like been transplanted, like Christopher Plummer, who was a Canadian. He adopted one when he set to acting, and you hear it there too. So what's cool is like the 60s is finally that voice, that accent is still there, but it's dying out. And what's cool is like Mrs. Robinson herself has one in this movie, as does Dustin Hoffman's own father. And I just think it's kind of an interesting thing. It's almost like they're like the old generation that's dying off, where and going into this more ethnically diverse thing, where it's not just a bunch of, again, highly educated, high society white people playing every role you can imagine. You know, you've got Charlton Heston, playing Ben-Hur and all this stuff, all those great grand movies of the 50s and 60s, those historical dramas, even when they're supposed to play slaves or they're supposed to play warriors or whatever. They're all these, clean-cut, well-spoken white people.
Yeah.
In the 60s is finally a shift where we're starting to see some more ethnicity and some more authenticity in some of these roles, although to this day that continues to be an issue, right? We've talked about it before, the whole whitewashing thing, and we don't need to retread on that. But I just find the whole mid-Atlantic accent thing very amusing, because if you go back just a decade before this film, 1957, we'll say, like every other film you watch was just filled with people with that accent. And I think I just wanted to explain it because I know we have some younger viewers who might just be a little confused, like, well, what is this accent? What does it mean? Well, again, it was a learned accent. It was something that was taught in schools to like wealthy people and stuff like that. And like a great example is FDR. FDR was highly educated, became president, and he spoke in one. So if anybody's wondering what this accent sounds like, you could listen to like a speech by FDR or something like that. And if you want more recent examples, people, myself included, a lot of people love, Mark Hamill for voicing the Joker. Like that is the Joker voice. He's using the mid-Atlantic accent there for Joker. So, but nowadays, if you hear it nowadays, it's because somebody's putting it on. It's not because it's how they really talk. It's because they want an effect for a character, which usually is, again, rich or snobby and stuff. And you'll hear it really played up in like a cartoon or something like that. But it is pretty much dying out. The last, there's probably others, but for me personally, the last like character I can think of that just had it and wasn't putting it on was the actor who played Mr. Feeney on Boy Meets World. He has one.
Wow, really?
Yeah, and that's like, and that was, that show lasted to the mid-90s, and I'm not saying it's never popped up since, but that's the last time I can really remember there being like a character where they weren't putting on a voice, they weren't doing something funny, where it was just this person speaking and it was him. But I do think that accent is really dying out now. It's not something that's taught, right? So you'd have to be at least 60 years old now, if not older, I think, to have really been taught it. They basically stopped teaching it, I'm sure, by the 50s at the latest.
So it's almost has a British quality to it.
Yeah, that's why it's called mid-Atlantic, right? Because it's sort of like it's like half British, right? It's like bridging the gap between like a British accent, like the high society British, because again, there's plenty of different British accents, but the more posh accents, as we say, and that. that's why, again, if you listen to somebody like Katharine Hepburn, you think, well, wait a second. I thought she was American,
It's funny that you say that. When I searched it on Google, the next question below it was, why does Katharine Hepburn's voice sound so weird?
There you go. Well, that's why. It was a reflection of her education.
Right.
But
that's what it's supposed to sound like. You're a more educated person, right?
Yeah, and like I said, nowadays in contemporary stuff, it's just like made up, like because they want to like give that impression. But really, it's not something that exists too much in the real world unless you're quite old. Like, you're not. There's not new generations of people being taught it. And again, it's an accent that is learned. It's not an accent that you inherit or necessarily get by environment, unless the environment is a school where they're hammering it into your head that this is the way you're going to say things.
Right.
So, yeah, in the next, few decades, I assume it will die out completely. And the only time we'll hear it is when people are just doing imitations. Like, it won't be a real one. So I just thought it was an interesting thing for it to show up in the movie, because it's almost like, again, that generation dying off and passing the torch, because Mrs. Robinson herself has a very strong one going, I think.
That's probably supposed to contrast with
Anne Bancroft. Sorry, I couldn't think of her name. The actress was Anne Bancroft. But anyway, go ahead. Yeah,
I was going to say it's probably supposed to contrast with Ben, even a little bit more.
Sure, exactly. Because even though he's like upper class and part of all that, like he's younger, and again, he's not part of that educational system. He doesn't learn. He speaks more normal, or definitely what the kids of that day would have been speaking. The younger types. And you see a few different moments. I mean, the movie is just moments over and over again of the older generation and the younger generation having interactions with each other, right down to I like when he's staying at the place to be near Berkeley. And the landlord there is like suspicious of everything he does and says, "You better not be one of those agitators," referring to like the counterculture wave at the time and protesters and stuff like that. It's like those outside agitators. And of course, that's actor Norman Fell, who in 10 years' time would go on to play another famous landlord. He was Mr. Roper on Three's Company.
Oh, wow.
Which is kind of funny. But I don't know how much people really need a setup of, because I think most people know, but he returns triumphantly, got his degree in whatever it was, but he's at a crossroads and returns to his wealthy family, and his family love trotting him out as this great success story to all their snobby, annoying friends and stuff, and he's kind of disgusted by it. And then in the midst of all this, he winds up being seduced by one of his neighbors, an older woman, the wife of a business partner of his husband. So you can imagine how awkward it was. And this is really what makes the movie, because I feel like the movie sort of has like the first half is one way and then the second half is another, right? The first half is a lot more lighthearted and stuff, and then things get a little more serious in the second part. But yeah, what really makes the movie for me is like you said, all that great shy awkwardness he shows with when she's trying to initiate things and stuff, and it's really what makes you overlook, as we say, him sort of being wrong for the role. What makes you overlook it is just how well he does in conveying that whole sense of awkwardness and being uncomfortable and not knowing what to do and stuff. Because again, that's when he's the most relatable to me. Because I know there's plenty of people out there, alpha male types, always want to say, bro, hit that, But you really have to think about the context. This was a woman he's known since he was a little kid and is among his parents' friends, and he's seen many times, and he knows for a fact is married. So you wouldn't just be like, oh, well, she's hot, go for it. There would be a lot of weird feelings going along with it for sure, and I think he does a good job of expressing that.
Yeah. I mean, he's friends with this girl, right? Like he grew up with her.
Oh yeah, Elaine. Yeah, exactly. So like, yeah, this is the mother of somebody that like he was one of his peers and stuff. So you can see why it would be weird to him. And she doesn't play around. She's, starts right off. She's had her eyes on him since from can you drive? Give me a drive. She's already got it on her mind. It's not something that like developed over time where she's thinking, oh, maybe I can do it. You can tell like it's what she set out to do from the very beginning.
Well, it's funny when she's trying to seduce him and everything. It's almost like, trying to put up with his awkwardness. Like, it doesn't even seem like she's really into it, but she's still doing it. I don't know. It's like she's got something to prove, or trying to, send a message to her husband or whatever she's trying to do here.
I think so, because it seems to have a lot less to do with like him. It's just more like what he represents, like a younger man that she could cheat on, like, and she's willing to put up with whatever hurdles that he throws in her way, and you can see her mounting frustration on this, but she keeps at it. She's very persistent. I mean, there's plenty of times where he's trying his best to excuse himself and get the hell out of there, and she'll rise to the occasion every time to come up with some pretext, something, even if it's like an order. Like towards the end, he's just saying, "Okay, I'm definitely leaving," and she's like, "Well, can you just bring the purse upstairs then?" So he's thinking, "Okay," and he says, "I'll put the purse on the stairs," and she's like, "Oh, for God's sake, can't you bring it to me? I'm in the bathroom." And she's like, "Well, I'll put it outside the door," and then she's like, "This is ridiculous. Can't you just hand me the purse?" Like, until finally she forces him into being physically right there with her so that she can continue on with it. But there's a great line in there where she says something like, "Well, don't you find me attractive?" or something like that, and he says, "Oh no, of course I do. You're the most attractive of all my parents' friends," which is a great line. I love how he says it, and it really does help. Like I said, if you're starting to like skew off a bit, and you're thinking, "Okay, come on, man, like." Just go for it. It sort of brings the reality of the situation back to you again. This is one of his parents' friends that he's known a long time, and she's married and stuff. So it is very uncomfortable for him. And what does she have to do to seal the deal? And this is true. This is absolutely what would work. Because I mean, wouldn't you do the same thing? Like, he's completely can't sleep with this woman. It's a bad idea for all these reasons. She's a married woman. I don't care. And then she starts asking him, well, if he's a virgin. And he's just like, "Oh, come on, you got to be joking," Although he doesn't say it right out that he isn't, but she starts dancing around like, "Oh, well, it's okay if you're a virgin," and it seems like he's even ready to let that go. She said, "Even though if you're inadequate," slams the door. Like, that would work on pretty much any guy that was having second thoughts or doubts, right? It's like, you do not want the woman, particularly an attractive woman, standing before you. You might have all these great moral reasons why you can't be with her, and you have the high ground. You're thinking. But if she calls you inadequate, I can see how a lot of guys in that situation would certainly cave. It's like, because we do not want to be called that, and we're really happy to prove them wrong, even though again he's just playing into her hands. That was her Hail Mary, right? She's like, well, I guess not Hail Mary, that's desperation, but that was her closer. She knew that would probably work if nothing else would. Secret weapon, maybe.
Sure. Old Mrs. Robinson. Man, like, how tired of you of that Simon and Garfunkel song by the end of the movie? God.
Mm-hmm. And it's not even the good version. Like, they would do it. Like, the version that we hear on the radio and stuff is better. This was first, and then they re-recorded it for the album that it came out on. But that's another thing. When we talk about like the massive popularity of this movie and some of the reasons why somebody like me thinks it's slightly overrated, I think the soundtrack had a huge part of it. Simon and Garfunkel just sort of exploded with this. Again, it's 1967. It's just really the beginning of that whole movement of folk rock that became so big. Dylan had been doing it throughout the 60s and gaining popularity. And then this is the point where Dylan kind of abandoned it, right? He picked up the electric guitar and went the other way. But in the wake of that, there were plenty of people that were ready to like keep it real and the whole folk thing. Peter, Paul, and Mary, and all these people. If you look it up, there's a huge movement.
I guess James Taylor, would he be around? Sure,
James Taylor and John Denver. I don't know how well known they were at the time, but they were about to be. The early 70s was really the heyday for these things, right? This is a little earlier, but I really feel like the soundtrack is definitely one of the big reasons, because these aren't just Simon and Garfunkel songs, but these are classic Simon and Garfunkel songs.
I mean, even if you haven't seen the movie, you know these songs. Yeah,
and the movie opens with The Sound of Silence, and it ends with The Sound of Silence, which is a really great song, really classic song that works really well in a movie. And of course, Scarborough Fair's in there. And the titular Mrs. Robinson. Although somebody like me, every time I hear it in the movie, it doesn't sound right, because I'm used to the version they did later, which sounds better to me. It's a little faster. The one in the movie is a little slowed down. Like when I always think of it's hey hey hey, but they're like hey hey. They slow down the hey hey hey's and stuff. I'm like, that's too slow. Like somebody like me, I'm so affected by music. I can never hear music and not really be consciously aware of it unless I'm really, for some reason, trying my best not to be. So,
Well, I think they changed the title of that song just for the movie, didn't they? Wasn't it Mrs.
uh,
Roosevelt or something to begin with?
oh, I think so. Yeah, I think you're right.
Mrs. something.
Robinson sounds really good though.
Yeah, it sounds better than Roosevelt for sure.
Yeah.
Think of Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yeah, not a great beauty.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm sure it's in here somewhere. Oh, it is about Eleanor. Wow.
Wow. Oh yeah, I knew that because it has the John
That's
DiMaggio
funny.
reference in the movie too, right? And there's
Wow.
the link there. And John DiMaggio was also linked to, or Joe DiMaggio. I said John. Jesus, what are people going to think of me? John DiMaggio, Joe DiMaggio. Even I know that. I'm wearing my baseball shirt, but Joe DiMaggio is of course linked to another old Hollywood, Marilyn Monroe.
Mm-hmm. I think a few of those old platinum blondes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure he had his.
But yeah, so it was sort of a transition period for that music too. Just like what we weren't really going to focus on it too much, but it's true that scene in Blow Up was kind of important with the song by the Yardbirds because, I think as we stated in that one, the original version of that song was called what is it? Train Kept a Rollin' or something.
Mm-hmm.
And Train Kept a Rollin' originally was written, I think, in 1951. It wasn't even rock and roll. It was pre-rock and roll. It would have been considered, that level of rhythm and blues that directly influenced rock and roll of the 50s. And what they done, and if you listen, and the Yardbirds had a version that was much more, rock and roll, the 60s, of that Train Kept a Rollin'. But because they couldn't get the rights to, I guess, the lyrics or the title to use in the soundtrack, they very quickly rewrote the lyrics and retitled it to Stroll On.
Mm-hmm.
But they also changed the musical arrangement. And if you listen back to back, if you listen to Train, and I mean the Yardbirds version, I mean the original, the Yardbirds version of Train Kept a Rollin' and Stroll On, there's a big difference there too. And it was really the start of a more hard rock sound that you would start to get going into the 70s and stuff too. You had that 2-guitar pronged attack by Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck. They only lasted, I think, for about 10 months before Jeff Beck moved on from the band.
Mm-hmm.
And got fired actually, but like the harder stuff you would see that Jimmy Page would get into with Led Zeppelin and stuff. It's actually a very significant song because it came out in 1966 and it just had a really hard raw riff and it had the feedback and stuff. So it was actually a very significant song as far as the evolution of rock went. And this isn't exactly the same thing, but it is another moment where we've got some really seminal folk rock songs just on the cusp of folk rock becoming a really big thing, particularly like in the US with all these artists and stuff that really, again, tied so well into the counterculture and stuff because so many of the songs had to do with, about peace and love or the beauty of nature and stuff and all that stuff that, these students were really, they were really jazzed on and stuff and wanted to use to inspire themselves as they fought for various causes, whether it was against the Vietnam War or it was against segregation and, well, not segregation, I guess, at that point, but, the equal rights movement, blah, 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 all that flower power stuff. So this is kind of right around that time, too, where you've got the Beatles at the height of their popularity and, but folk rock really becoming a big thing, and Simon and Garfunkel were the absolute giants of it, really. And so these are some of the most significant songs, and I do think that that's a big reason why the movie was such a big deal in its day, was because it really brought that music onto the radar of a lot of people that may not have been aware of it. It was only 1967, so I think that's another reason why the movie has sort of enjoyed the success it's had and has had. The reputation it's had, etc., because the soundtrack plays a very big part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's it definitely fits the movie and the time period. It's just I've heard all those songs so many times. It's just it gets a little old to me. But
yeah, I know what you mean.
By the end of the movie, I was kind of tired of it.
Yeah.
Like, all right, come on, let's get the Sound of Silence. Come on.
Yeah. But getting back to the casting of the movie, like they cast everybody you could think of for these roles. And before Hoffman, you know, people like Robert Redford and Warren Beatty were like the big candidates because they fit more what the character was in the book, more of a, you know, I don't know, leading man type, we'll say, as opposed to somebody like Dustin Hoffman. And just like Natalie Wood was considered for both the roles of Elaine and Mrs. Robinson. So, because they really play around with age, and she turned down both. Like, as we said, like the fact that he was a 30-year-old playing a 20-year-old is just the tip of the iceberg. If you look at the age things going on here, his father was William Daniels. He was only 39 when the movie came out. So he's only a few years older than Hoffman, his son. You got going on there, although he does at least seem a little bit older. Anne Bancroft, very convincingly, she seems like she's at least in her 40s to me.
She does seem older, yeah.
But she's only 35.
Wow, really?
So she's barely any older than him. She's 6 years older than Hoffman at this point. You know, Elaine is supposed to be 19. She's played by a 27-year-old, but that's we're kind of used to that. That's basically par for the course nowadays in Hollywood. You know, we got the 18, 19-year-olds being played by people who are approaching 30. That still goes on to this day. But yeah, the age stuff is just all over the place in these movies. And this isn't important, but there's this funny part of the movie. Remember where he's in the Taft Hotel for the first time and he accidentally stumbles into that I don't know what it was, but that big reception thing with all the people. And there's two of these women chatting at him. There's two women there that very briefly introduce themselves as sisters. Well, if they were sisters in real life, one of them was 44 and the other one was 82.
Damn.
You know, so I think that's funny, like just the way like age is done in the movie as far as characters and the actors actually playing them. So it's all over the board. But the most important, of course, is Dustin Hoffman trying to convincingly play. Like he plays it convincingly, but he just doesn't look right. But
yeah,
I don't mind too much.
I didn't have a problem with his age too much. I mean, it wasn't like strikingly or anything, you know. It didn't, you know, take me out of the film.
Yeah, but oh yeah, here as far as Paul Simon writing the movies, writing the songs. Nichols was really trying to encourage him to write more stuff, even though he was in the middle of big tours. And he's playing the new song, and he says, well, this isn't for the movie. It's a song about times past, about Mrs. Roosevelt and Joe DiMaggio and stuff. And Nichols said, well, now it's about Mrs. Robinson, not Mrs. Roosevelt. So, yeah, it was directly because of him telling him that, because the movie, yeah, that was supposed to be a different song. Like, he was writing songs for the movie. That wasn't supposed to be one of them. And Nichols was like, yeah, I think it is. I mean, we've got a Mrs. Robinson in here. It fits perfectly, so I don't know.
Yeah, Mike Nichols seems kind of hard to work with. I don't know. Just kind of what I got the impression of by reading some of this trivia.
Oh, okay. I really wasn't. I'm not too aware of sort of like how the making of the movie went beyond some of the casting and stuff.
But I mean, just stuff like that. You know, he wrote stuff for the movie. Like, no, I want the one you specifically said I can't have. You know.
Yeah, that's true. But I don't know. It's hard to, you know, in retrospect, with the benefit of hindsight, it's hard to say he was wrong because now it's just synonymous with the movie, right? But again, it could have gone a different way, and we would never have noticed. So, but yeah, all I know is that he was one of those auteur directors, which fits with, like we said, the whole New Hollywood thing. He in that one thing we sort of didn't mention about these directors. And one of the things that made them, we were talking about some of the things that made these directors different from directors of generations past. We talked about a few of them, but one of the things we didn't mention is that usually these directors worked more closely with the actors. They were more involved as far as that would go. I don't mean to paint all the older directors with the same brush because, of course, that's not fair. But I mean, in general, you could say a lot of those directors, it was just about moving the actors around, and as far as their performances go, sort of leaving it up to them how they were going to do it. And they were more concerned with the technical aspects of, you know, getting the right shots, et cetera, whereas they kind of left the acting style and stuff more to the actor. Now, that's not, you know, 100% true. I'm sure there were plenty of instances in the older Hollywood where a director would ask for something more, you know, acting-wise out of the actor or performer, etc. But this was really the era where this became more commonplace, where the director would really have a specific idea for how they wanted actors to play the scenes, and they would go in and, you know, sometimes even physically show them and stuff like that. And Nichols is certainly one of those people too. He did that a lot in, I guess, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which is another important film of this era for sure. Probably the other really big one that was going on there. But you know, I guess we can save this topic for another show, but just sort of remind me, because it doesn't really pop up here. But another thing that marked a shift in sort of how acting went, besides the other stuff we said, is that this was sort of really the rise of method acting in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And Hoffman himself would do it, although not in this movie, but he did a movie in the 70s called Marathon Man. And for part of his method acting, you know, the whole point is he's a character that's constantly on the run, hence the title, you know, and is to help himself seem really worn out. He literally stayed up for several days, so he would have that look of like not sleeping. And and of course, people who are familiar with that film know that one of the biggest actors of yesteryear, Sir Laurence Olivier himself, is in that movie with him. And people like him were basically ranged from between politely bemused to disgusted by method acting. And many times on the set of that movie, he often got very frustrated with the way Hoffman was doing it and would just say, for Christ's sake, just act. You know, like, he came from an old school that was like acting as performance. You don't. And nowadays, I think not to go on a tangent, but we've really fallen in love with method acting.
Yeah.
And I kind of think it's overrated, you know, to tell you the truth.
It depends on, you know, where you're at with it, but it's, you know, we got some great performances because of it, for sure.
Sure,
you know,
and it also depends on exactly how strongly you define it. For instance, because people will say, oh, well, Meryl Streep did method acting in that she learned a language or she learned how to play an instrument. I accept that sort of as method acting, but I also accept it as kind of necessary, usually. Now, not to do a whole language. There's this whole thing about...
Sophie's Choice, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and there's this whole thing about Daniel Day-Lewis, an actor I really don't care for, you know, learning to speak Czech just so that he could speak with a certain accent in a scene where he doesn't speak Czech, just so that he could have the Czech accent. And to me, that's ridiculous.
Well, I mean, I can appreciate it, though, you know, more so than somebody just showing up, you know. I mean, it's somebody who's done their prep work, you know. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, like I said, there's a fine line, like how far do you go? When I'm talking about method acting, I sort of really mean the extreme method acting. I think there's plenty of times, to me personally, where actors really put themselves in a space that was not at all necessary to play the role. They just really, I think it was more like they wanted to show they could do it, and they really wanted to get praised afterwards. Because nowadays, let's face it, what's the main thing we give Oscars for? Again, we give Oscars for either playing somebody who is real. That we love biopics. We love them. If you played somebody that was a real person in history, for some reason, that's a great thing. And of course, and the other is playing someone that maybe had some sort of mental issues. But if you play somebody who was real and had mental issues, oh man, that is guaranteed. I mean, look at like A Beautiful Mind or something like that. Like, that's like a perfect combination.
Forrest Gump.
Yeah, exactly. Like, people just can't get enough of that shit. And the other side is we like seeing the actors like put themselves through some sort of like, you know, horrible suffering.
Right.
Think of all the great performances Leonardo DiCaprio did. All sorts of great performances, good accents, good, you know, ranges of characters. But it took him like freezing himself to death in a goddamn river for people to give him an Oscar. Now, I like that movie, but how is his performance really that good for the character, or is it just more his performance is good because of the physical shit he put himself through, and we see the real effects of it? Like, at that point, it's not even acting. It's just like, he doesn't have to act cold because he's cold. He doesn't have to act tired or weary.
Like, I'm going to punch you in the face and you act like it hurts.
Yeah. You know? Oh, brilliant performance. Yeah. So
but,
maybe we'll get into this more as we do some of the other films in the 70s where it was definitely applied. But I just wanted to bring it up. I don't have anything against maybe the concept of method acting, but it just seemed like we got to a point where at one point, like, acting was one thing and then that was that. But then Marlon Brando started doing some weird shit and they were like, oh, this is the new school. This is the way to act. And, you know, it's kind of taken off in a crazy direction ever since. And to this day, we love it. We're all like, oh, man, Heath Ledger was really getting into being the Joker. And, oh, you know, like, we love that shit.
Yeah. What about Shia LaBeouf, like, pulling his teeth out for that Tank movie? I forget what it was called.
Everything Shia LaBeouf does is ridiculous.
He pulled his teeth out, or pulled some of his teeth out.
Yeah. Because Shia LaBeouf, like, again, he's not even an actor. He's a performer. He just does stuff. He's artist all the time, man. Like, he doesn't have to be behind a camera in a movie. He's always performing his art. Like,
art, man.
Yeah, which is a great excuse when you're caught in public doing something really embarrassing.
Yeah.
But it's not like I've never enjoyed him in a movie. I have, and he even seems like an interesting guy. But I will say, yes, I do think everything he does is ridiculous.
Yeah, I wish I didn't like his performances.
And 90% of it 90% of it at least is unnecessary.
Sure. Well, like you remember the Nymphomaniac stuff?
Yeah, sure. I watched both of those.
Yeah, I think those are both really good films too.
Yeah,
but
long but good.
Yeah, you know, the whole thing about it was actual, intercourse. You know, it wasn't. I guess.
Are we ever going to get to a part where like people like stop asking about that? Like, it's not too. It doesn't seem like a big deal to me anymore.
Why does it matter?
Yeah.
I mean,
because I mean, like, I think of like a fairly like mainstream movie nowadays that was like a big deal was Monsters Ball, right? And Monsters Ball had what would be considered a mainstream cinema, fairly graphic sex scenes between Halle Berry and that asshole
Billy Bob Thornton.
Billy Bob Thornton. And I mean, it seems pretty convincing, but obviously there's no penetration there. But at the same time, like, do we need to know that there wasn't? Does it make us feel better?
There's no penetration. It didn't happen.
Even though, like,
I agree.
It's really close, right? Like, so to me, if somebody said, well, actually there is penetration, they're really doing it there, I'd be like, well, good then. Good, because that's what it's supposed to look like, so good. I wouldn't be like, oh my God, they've become porn stars or something like that. I was like, I just feel like simulated sex is a really weird thing, and we could just talk all night about the whole idea of simulated sex and stuff. Like, how fucking weird is it when you think of, like, you watch Game of Thrones, and you see that kid breastfeeding. So he's not breastfeeding because it's like a thing, but still, I mean, doesn't that have the same goddamn psychological effect? Because we're worried about, well, we can't have like this 10-year-old kid sucking on some woman's nipple for real. That's messed up. But what's not messed up is having him suck on some sort of prosthetic thing over it. Like, it's just as messed up, man. So I'm not, so I don't know. There's so many things I could say about that, but yeah, simulated sex. It has its uses. I'm not saying all sex scenes should be real fucking. I'm just saying it's weird because if you're showing a movie that's not pornographic, you're not under any sort of obligation to really show anything.
Right.
You can just do the old style where they start kissing and fall down, and then we see the curtains blowing in the wind, or whatever.
That's fine, man. That's fine with me.
And that's how they do it. Like in this movie. This movie is known for having it's supposed to be a lot of sex, but they don't show anything.
Right.
They never show anything. It's just implied. It's like, well, obviously he and her are having sex, they're meeting and they're having sex, but they don't show anything. And it doesn't detract from the movie for me. But
no, I don't think that's necessary most of the time. To actually show that. But
all right. So of course, for this movie, as far as like being new Hollywood and breaking new ground in the sexuality thing, it wasn't because of what it was showing. It was because of what it was implying. Because it was about, here is an older woman with a younger man, which is true to this day, still blows people's fucking minds. In 2017, that still just blows people's minds when they hear about an older woman and a younger guy. Like, they can't figure it out. I mean, it's something I personally I don't think I'd ever do. But it doesn't make me go, whoa, or, freak out. Like, no, I in my life, I've never been attracted to older women. Even when I was a kid, I wasn't attracted to older women, to tell you the truth. And I don't mean all older women are unattractive. Don't misinterpret. I'm just saying. But, I mean, it's a pretty common thing usually, especially growing up. It's like, oh, an older woman, a sophisticated woman, a woman that, So people say, like, I see the appeal. They say that. But then when it happens in a movie or real life, people, like, that goes out the window, and somehow it's scandalous and strange.
Well, she's experienced.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, but now you know why this movie was so popular too. But, because of that, I guess, taboo subject matter.
Sure, and of course, the big thing, even bigger, I think, than the whole age difference thing, is really adultery.
Exactly.
Because let's think about it. Because adultery had shown up in plenty of movies before them, but it was always shown basically on, like, it usually didn't show us anything sort of humanistic about it. It was just adultery is bad. There's adultery going on. They're two bad people, or they're one good person and one bad person, and the bad person is corrupting the good person. You know, it's like the good person who's married, but somehow this bad person seduces them and gets at that. Whereas in this, you know, him and Mrs. Robinson, neither is necessarily good or bad. I mean, and of course, Mrs. Robinson, of course, reveals herself to be quite bad in a lot of ways. I know you could say, well, she's kind of a bitch and evil, and look at what she's willing to do. But at the same time, you have to. A lot of her situation is somewhat understanding and understandable. She talks about like having like a sexless marriage at this point, and again, gasp, an older woman, you know, feels like, you know, she should still be able to get sex. You know, I guess that's sort of a new thing too. It's like, you're married, your sex life dies, you get old.
I think a woman enjoying sex is still a new thing at that period of time.
Yeah, for sure. And here's a woman who's, you know, being very proactive to go out and get it. Like, she says, like, she's not having sex with her husband. They're sleeping in separate bedrooms at this point. She doesn't elaborate to why, but she's, you know, she still enjoys sex. She wants to seek it out. So here's a chance. So yeah, so that's one of the things that made the movie significant too. But also, what's also true, I think, is whenever they showed like marriage in movies, they would never get too critical of the idea of marriage. Marriage in movies in the old days was, marriage is good. Look at all the great things that come from marriage. And then as we got into maybe a little later, they would have comedies where they would say, haha, yes, marriage isn't always perfect. Marriage has its quirks, you know, and you would see that in some of like the sitcoms in the 50s and 60s too. But what they're still saying is, yes, we're willing to admit that marriage isn't perfect and has its flaws, but it's still wonderful and great and what everybody should do. And finally, this movie is actually being somewhat honest, saying, you know, marriages can be great for some people, but in the wrong situation, marriage can just be terrible and a bad thing and a thing that traps you. And I don't really think that had shown up in too many American films at this point. And I think that's another reason why this is a big deal. When you go into the 70s and stuff, you'd start to see all sorts of movies about affairs and marriages breaking down and stuff like that. Whereas in other previous movies, again, it was more they might have a little fun with it, but they wouldn't get too serious. Or if it was serious, it was just completely black and white. It was, oh, you cheated, you're an adulterer, you're bad, that's bad, you know, you violated marriage. Marriage is the ultimate thing. This is one of the first movies I can think of, an American movie, where they're like just being honest, saying, you know, yeah, marriage isn't perfect, marriage has its problems, but also marriage can, you know, be even worse than that. You know, it can, like I said, it can be a trap, and it can cause misery to people, and it can make them do damaging things. Mm-hmm. But as you say, like, it's weird though, because she doesn't want to end the marriage.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, at the very end, he says
it's a direct result. Yeah, the husband says,
right.
Now we're getting a divorce.
Right, and I mean, divorce was still, you know, taboo at that period of time.
So you can understand too. It's not like she'd be like, well, why don't you get a divorce and then you can do what you want? Yeah. Well, they're the upper crust of society. They have certain expectations. You know, it would never do for us to have a divorce, and that's what he's saying. Like, that things are so bad that we have to have a divorce. Like, you know, like the worst thing. Although you totally understand his whole tirade there. Everything he says is completely justified, really.
Sure.
You know, I mean, how would you like to find out that not only had your wife been like sleeping with some young guy, but now the young guy has designs on your daughter? Oh my God, that's like a huge recipe for you to like murder him right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he's not that kind of guy, as you see. He just does it all verbal. But yeah, if he was a different sort of character, he would have just come in with like a shotgun or something.
That was odd because, you know, Dustin Hoffman, or Ben, wasn't really trying to be physical, but he kept, you know, stay away from me. You know,
Oh yeah, because at one point he says like, unclench your fist. Like, he takes that as a threat. Like, we see this. He's one of those guys, and these are people true. They're so not physical that like they're even threatened when nobody's even meaning to be. Like, he sees like the clenched fist and he thinks that's going to be an attack.
That was funny.
You know, and at one point he says something and he repeats it and he doesn't yell it. He's like, "All right, don't yell it."
Yeah.
Like, no need for I don't need to be shouted at or something. So yeah, he's kind of a delicate guy in a lot of ways. He's coming out here to like, you know, vent all his anger and frustration on him, but the slightest anything sets him off, which is kind of funny.
Whoa! Stop yelling.
Yeah.
I think he was.
Even though
you don't respect me very much, and he said, "No, or no, sir."
No, sir. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, he has all sorts of really good, like, just honestly delivered lines that really make, you know, again, despite all like the outside all the outside factors making it seem like he's wrong for the role. He has, like, again, how he delivers these lines and stuff proves that he actually was right, which is pretty cool.
Oh yeah, I think Dustin Hoffman kills it. I don't think it would have been nearly as. It definitely wouldn't have had the comedic moments that it
No,
has.
it wouldn't have. It wouldn't have.
Because he delivered those perfectly.
Yeah.
He was so awkward, and he just nails it.
Mm-hmm. And that's when he's most relatable to me. Although, again, it's weird because, not to get too personal about myself, but I mean, I've had all sorts of confidence issues to this day that continue to have all sorts of self-esteem and confidence issues that affect me in some very mundane ways. Like, sometimes I want to do something that's a pretty normal thing, and yet I'll have all these weird doubts that keep me from doing it, sort of an anxiety thing. And yet, like, even though I had all the recipes, like, to be very shy and not have confidence around, like, girls and stuff growing up, I really did get past that. And even by the time I was his age, like, I would have had all the weird discomfort and stuff that he had, of course, given the situation, like this older woman who's, a neighbor of mine and friend to, my parents and all this stuff. Like, I would definitely feeling that. But yeah, as far as, like, once you've gotten past that, I really wouldn't have been too nervous or anything like that. Although it's sort of implied he's the same way, because, like I said, how does she finally bag him? It's like when she says, "Well, if you're inadequate," he's like, "I'll show you inadequate." That seals the deal for him. That you might be an older, experienced woman, but I am a young, virile man, and I'm going to show you something. It's pretty funny. But yeah, that's where I find him the most relatable is those moments and stuff. How he starts acting around Elaine is not relatable for me at all, even though I get it. Like, I don't think it's completely off. I mean, I get it. So what we get to, of course, is the discussion where she's saying about, like, how Elaine's coming. She says, "I don't want you taking her out." And he's just like, "Why would I take her out? We've got this thing going on." And then at one point, she's finally, like, saying, like, "I forbid you to," and he gets really mad.
Yeah.
And he's just like, "Whoa, I'm good enough for you, and I'm not good enough for your daughter," and stuff. It's funny that she doesn't just point out the obvious. It's like, well, given that you and I have been fucking, maybe it wouldn't be appropriate, and it would be really weird for you to take my daughter out. Like, she doesn't say that, even though, like, why wouldn't you? And he turns it into a whole thing about being good enough for her or something like that. It's like, why don't you just say the obvious? But she doesn't for whatever reason. And that leads to one of the more famous shots in the movie. In fact, if you look up, like, a Google image search or stuff, you get that shot of where the camera pans back behind her and you have the leg going into the pantyhose, and the shot of him standing in the doorway and her leg seductively across. And it's kind of funny because you see that out of context and you think that it's part of the seduction. It's like, oh, here's the woman. But it's actually, in the context of the movie, it's not that at all. This is after that. He's gotten mad at her. He's hurriedly dressed himself. He told her she can go to hell. And she's just putting on her clothes too. She's putting on her clothes, not taking them off. So it's actually, even though the shot makes it look like, oh, here's a shot of her doing the seduction, it's not. Right. It's after all that, when they're actually being mad at each other. So I think it's funny that shot has endured because it sort of is a symbol. It's a symbol, symbolizes the seduction and what he was going through. But it's not him coming through the door and her going, well, hello, and doing that. It's them already having had sex, having a fight, and getting dressed. I think it's kind of funny because it's kind of an inversion. But anyway.
Yeah, you definitely wouldn't know that. I think that's on quite a few of the posters, and I think most of the posters that's the same.
Yeah, exactly. And when people think, like, where he says, "Mrs. Robinson, you're trying to seduce me, aren't you?" I think a lot of people figure it's like right there, but it's not. It came way before that. But yeah, how, like, nervous and apologetic and stuff he is, like, I certainly relate to that. Like, even though he's totally right when he's saying that about her being seducing, and she's like, "Oh, don't be silly. Of course I'm not." Like, I do the same thing. I'm like, "Oh, I'm very sorry I said that. I was stupid. Can we forget it? I want to go." And then she just presses on. But I probably would have done the same thing in that situation.
And I like how she says, "Okay, I'm going to get undressed." And he says, "What should I do? Should I stand over here?" And she said, "Why don't you watch?" And
he says, "Oh, yes, thank you."
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he says, "Oh, yes, thank you." Like,
that's very funny.
I'll enjoy that, yes. Yeah. And that's why I feel like the first half is a lot more enjoyable than the second half when it gets more serious, when it all turns on him taking. So, of course, he's manipulated into having to take Elaine out. His parents more or less force him to. And so he has this plan that makes sense on the surface. I'll show her a really bad time. She won't like me. And that'll be the end of it. I wanted to go out with her, but it's not a too well thought out plan because if you overdo it, she'll be so upset that his parents will definitely find out about it, and they'll be like, what the hell did you do to that girl?
Yeah.
And he takes her to this stream. He drives around like a crazy man, takes her to some sort of burlesque strip club thing, which, I mean, I guess would be shocking in 1967, but compared to strip clubs of today or even a few years later, that place was positively elegant.
Oh, absolutely. It's nice.
Think about like Taxi Driver only a few years later, the places he went to, and like the scummy and disgusting places there. So yeah, actually where he brings her isn't that bad, but of course, you know, she's a good girl of a good family, and she gets very upset, and you have the most nudity we see in the movie, of course, is the stripper on the stage doing the tassels on her boobs, and she does it right over her and stuff like that. And he's being a real ass. He's like, wow, that's a good talent. He's like, can you do that? And then she's like, even starts to cry, and he realizes he's gone too far. And that's where the movie turns. He realizes he's gone too far, and she's actually a good girl. Not only is she a really nice girl, but, oh, wait, I think I love her. Yeah. Although, why? I don't know. But that's the same logic in many movies, right? In many movies. I mean, I get it. I mean, that's kind of the rule. It's funny, because you think at first the movie's skirting that, but it's the same rule that we have to this day in how romance works in movies. You're an attractive, age-appropriate opposite sex. And that's all it is. You're around my age, you're attractive, you're the opposite sex. That's all it is for romance in 99% of films to this day. So it makes perfect sense within that context. And of course he falls in love with her.
Right.
And, you know, he tells her that they're starting to like each other. She suggests they could get a drink at a bar at the hotel. This is, of course, the same hotel where he'd been, you know, taking her mom, and all the people there, you know, it's funny, all the staff there recognize him. He'd been going as a false name. What is it? Mr. Good something. Fairbanks, Goodbanks. Oh, shit. Okay. Wait, I have it.
I don't remember.
I know I have. Mr. Gladstone, that's it. Mr. Gladstone. Yeah. They're all like, hello, Mr. Gladstone. Good to see you, Mr. Gladstone. And, you know, because I think it's a lot harder to do that nowadays, right? Because isn't like the first thing they want at a hotel a credit card, which would have, you know, your real name on it and stuff. But anyway, he's Mr. Gladstone. Them, you know, he comes right forward, and she puts it together really quickly. She's like, "Have you been having an affair?" And he owns up to a certain point that yes, he'd been having an affair with an older married woman, and now it was over. And that's where the movie changes. You know, most of the comedy is kind of done with now. Not all of it, most of it, and it becomes a whole different thing. And they focus on the fact that his parents can't stand the fact that he won't commit to anything and he's lazing around. Like they used to trot him off to their friends as this big success story, but now he's being too idle, and they want him to do something and stuff. And yeah, and he's feeling very upset about that. And now he has the stress of this whole being in love with Elaine thing, but hiding this big secret from her, this awful secret. And Mrs. Robinson, you know, is not happy at all with the situation, and very quickly goes on the attack, even though he says, you know, I never meant for my parents made me and stuff. But she says, I'll tell her everything. And he just decides to beat her to the punch, which goes about as well as you'd expect. She fully freaks, but
yeah, about as well as you'd expect.
Yeah. So then the rest of the movie turns into a thing about him and it is very odd, like him and Elaine, like, how much do they have? They didn't have very much before this happens, and yet he can't get her out of her mind. And even though at first she goes to Berkeley and she seems to be doing other stuff, she lets him back into his life. Like, he's sort of stalking her. He goes down to her just because, and she calls him out on it. She's like, why did you come here and stuff? It's like, I think it was for me. And he's like, yeah, it was for you. And, you know, she doesn't give him a clear, well, stop stalking me or get away from me or it's over, I never want to see you again. She's kind of lukewarm and lets him back in, which I guess for purposes of the script is to show that she does have feelings for him. But again, it's one of these parts of the movie where I know any sort of relationship, I mean, it's true. Anybody that's had relationships, love, whatever, it's not rational. It's true. So anytime you pick on any sort of romance in a movie, there's always the argument, well, of course it's not rational and you can't help how you feel and stuff. But still, it's still to the point where I watch this movie and I think, like, why does she still like him? You know, and I can't get it. And then he's like glued to her. And they show like this montage where he's like going everywhere she goes. You know, he's like, He follows her to the door of the class. As soon as the class is over, he's still standing there. So presumably he stood there for an hour to continue the conversation. You know, she's in study group, she's in gym and stuff, and he's in all those places. So what is weird is like they show that like he's wherever she goes because she's sort of non-committal about being with him, but she's not outright telling him to go away. But somehow, despite the fact that he's always with her, she's managed to still have some sort of courtship with the other guy.
Right.
When did she find time and opportunity to do this?
Yeah, but she's still dating this other guy who, I mean, God, what has it been? Weeks? Like 2 weeks she's been dating this guy,
maybe.
and now she's engaged to him.
Yeah. Which is part of the whole parental manipulation again. Like, her parents are very much like his parents, which are probably very much like the parents of this guy, which is, yeah, they're a good match. Let's get them hitched and stuff. And so then, of course, the last 20 minutes of the movie is him on a mad dash when he finds out the wedding is going to happen. Of course, he finds out from Mrs. Robbins himself. Is a mad dash to find where the wedding is and stop it, which is actually the plot of a very old movie, a Harold Lloyd movie from the 20s called Girl Shy, whereas basically almost the exact same sort of thing happens in the last third of that movie. It's all about this guy who's really shy, and every time he's around girls, he freaks out and can't do it, but then through some weird, wacky happenstance, he meets this girl, Mary, who he does fall in love with, but her parents don't like him because they think he's too low class or something, and then he finds out that she's set to be married to this guy, and the whole part is like a comedic race for him to go stop the wedding, and that's kind of the exact same thing we get here.
I feel like I've seen that so many times in so many
movies.
Is what
really, and I mean, yeah, then this is really started the whole runaway bride template, right, which we've seen in so many movies, and stop the wedding thing. And this is, well, maybe the Harold Lloyd one is the real originator of it. This is the movie that put it on the map, made it a thing, and it's been imitated and homaged and parodied all across the board. But like I said, like I knew basically the first time I ever watched this movie, I knew once we got to that point, I knew everything that was going to happen because I'd already seen it played out in other media and stuff. And I mean, it's done pretty well. And then we get the Mrs. Robinson finally kicks in and stuff. All the moody, quiet parts of the film are over, and we get the iconic dash. I think one of the guys at the guy's dorm that he asks that says something to him when he's asking about where the wedding is Richard Dreyfuss in his first film role.
Really? Okay.
Yep. So yeah, he's amongst the guys. He says something about it because when he's trying to find out where the wedding is. But yeah, I'm sure people know the very iconic thing of racing his car around, trying to find out, and through various things, finally finding out where the church is. Going up to the church, it's a church that has like a weird glass section on the second floor up above that can view the why can't I think of the word? I had a churchy upbringing, now I can't think of the word.
Procession? Is that it?
No, the area. What's that area called?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of it too. The altar?
Yeah, it's the area the altar's in, but it has a more... Anyway, I'm stupid that I can't think of it. But anyway, yeah, where he's looking down there and he's pounding on the glass, and the whole thing is everybody's freaking out, like, what's this guy doing, ruining the wedding and stuff. But then, and he's yelling her name, but then it all turns because he's going, Elaine, Elaine, and then she finally cries out, Ben, and that's how you know, oh, she's on board. She wants to be rescued and taken out of this. At least this whole thing of a physical altercation in the stairs, the swinging the cross at the people to keep them away, which is especially hilarious from the perspective of him being a Jew.
Right.
You know, you have the Jew waving the cross with all these...
Get the Jew out of here.
Yeah. And then, I'm sure you've heard this before, and it's one of the most iconic for whatever endings ever, them getting on the bus together. And I'm sure you've heard this before. And everybody makes of like what really makes the movie is the fact that the camera stays on them, and you know, at first they're really enthused and jacked up and happy about it, but as time goes, their facial expressions sort of change until it seems like reality's setting in, and now they're not even sure if they did the right thing, right? But you've probably heard that Mike Nichols wasn't shooting that day. He was sick or something, or couldn't be there, and it was the second unit director that had to do it. And the only reason the shot lingered was because he didn't know what the hell he was doing. He didn't know when he was supposed to cut it. And the actors aren't acting. They're just being confused because they don't know if it's still rolling or not. And that's supposed to be what led to that great, like, emotional moment. Is just sort of a mistake. Was like, he kept it running too long because he wasn't sure where he was supposed to cut. The actors didn't know if it was still rolling or if it were cut. And they're just sort of coming out of character and a bit bewildered and confused. And that's what leads to this, what so many people think is this great ending, because it's showing us like, oh, it's not necessarily happy. They're not really sure if, you know, the relationship's going to work or not. And, you know, the movie doesn't let us know. But yeah, it was kind of a mistake.
Yeah, I just posted that on the Twitter a little while ago. The exact, the lingering shot.
Yeah.
Like,
One of the other movies that was part of this that also has Dustin Hoffman is Midnight Cowboy, which also like ends like, or at least most of the ending is like on a bus too, right? Him and he's on the bus going down to Florida or whatever with his friend. But yeah, what were our movies? Yes, what were our movies? It was
Midnight Cowboy,
Midnight Cowboy, the producers, and Cool Hand Luke.
Mm-hmm.
And you, the viewers, chose this. I can understand why. It might be the most iconic of the four. And maybe some of you were, I don't know if it's an age thing or what, maybe some of you, and maybe not, or just curious and you thought they're wondering why it has that reputation, because that's sort of how I felt before I saw the movie and stuff, and wanted to hear our thoughts on it or stuff. Or hopefully some of you had the chance to watch it again recently, so I'd like to know what you think. Because I don't really feel like it's aged poorly exactly. I don't know. I don't know. Again, sometimes I think it's just a context thing, and you had to have been there. So I can never really, it can never really have the impact on me that it could have had on audiences in 1967, which is a shame in some ways. But I mean, still, when I read about and I hear about like the things, and we talked about them at length here, that made it stand out, I get all of it. And I guess at the moment, I can't think of a movie from, say, within a 3 or 4 year span going either way that does the same things better. I guess I can't. What really stands out to me, like I said, is to me, it's kind of the first significant comedy drama, really, in that it was a serious movie with serious stuff, but still had comedic elements. Because I think really earlier film, it was kind of one or the other. You didn't really blend tones. A comedy was all the way out comedy. A drama was all the way out dramatic, and never the two shall meet. And this isn't the first movie ever, I'm sure it's not, but it's definitely one of the most, again, sort of big and significant movies, I think, to do that. And it sort of started a whole subgenre in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're just commonplace now. It's pretty normal to see, a comedic drama or a dramatic comedy or whatever you want to call them. It's a pretty normal thing. But I think they were, at least, if they certainly probably existed, but they were definitely still a very rare thing, I think, before The Graduate came out.
Yeah, real quick, I just wanted to say it's kind of interesting how, they actually did get married at the end. Her and the other guy, whatever his name.
Yeah,
was.
they were already married. He didn't stop the wedding.
Yeah.
He just got her out of it, which is even funnier.
This is the Mrs. Robinson says he's too late.
Yeah, there's a great moment where you get the idea where she's going to say a lot more, and she's just like, "Not for me," and leaves. I like that. That's known as the "shut up, Hannibal." It's where you stop the villain from monologuing. Yeah. But yeah, this movie has lots of good little things like that. And invented some of them, as we said. It definitely invented that whole stop the wedding thing.
Yeah. And, talking about, being influenced by European movies, obviously his little car that he has.
Mm-hmm.
This is the Alfa Romeo. And, some of the camera angles were kind of similar to some stuff we would see in Blow Up.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I didn't have much to say about camera angles or something, but one thing I'll say that's pretty good, it's probably not the first time it's used, but it was done well, is at the beginning when he's at the party, there's a lot of close-ups. Mm-hmm. Like, it's right on the people's faces. And I thought that was good because it really gives the indication of, like, if what we've all probably experienced one time or another, party we don't want to be at, and people keep coming up to us and getting in our face and stuff. Yeah. It conveys that very well. Like, everywhere he turns, somebody else, like some annoying, like he just wants to go upstairs and be alone. And his parents, and he's gotten away from his parents, but now people just keep getting in his face. And I think they do a good job of that by having the camera really close in. Yeah. I think that's well done. But
I think they did a great job of like establishing those kind of people and the society he was raised. Because you got the one guy that tells him to invest in plastics or whatever.
Yeah,
which I think is one of the more famous lines from the movie.
Yes, very much so.
And everybody's what are you gonna do? And just really dumb cliche things you would say to someone who just graduated.
Yeah, and they're like, and of course the irony later of Mrs. Robinson's husband, telling him to like sow his wild oats and stuff.
Yes, sir. But yeah, it's a really good movie. Great blend of comedy and drama, like you said. It wasn't my choice, but definitely wanted to put it on the list and
Yeah.
let everybody
I
choose
didn't
for
want to.
us.
Yeah, I didn't want to indicate. I might have done Midnight Cowboy just because of those is the one that maybe I need to revisit the most. But this would have been a close second as far as what I need to revisit. Producers, I just love. I watch all the time. And Cool Hand Luke, I like things about it, but to be honest, I don't really know what made it part of New Hollywood. It almost seemed like a dying, gasping breath of the older Hollywood. Like, I mean, maybe just because it was a little heavier is part of it. It was a little.
Yeah. It does kind of feel more old school than some of these others.
Plus, I mean, it starred what was it? Paul Newman, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, and see, he wasn't part of the new generation. He was
Right.
still the established generation too. Now, I'm not saying you couldn't have movies that have both. Like I said, this movie sort of a marrying of that. It was and I think that's one of the things that made it work well because we have the older generation and the new generation, and very much at odds with each other is part of the theme of the movie. There's lots of good themes being touched on here. The older generation, the newer generation, the more specific version of that of parents and their children, parents that have expectations for their children, parents that want to control their children's lives and stuff. Because, yeah, and we've seen plenty of movies or stories and stuff where it's the other way, where, the story, nothing I did was ever good enough for my parents, no matter what I did. And we see sort of the flip side of this, where it's like, okay, he graduated college, and he just knows, okay, I graduated college, I'm the graduate. And they're all treating him like he did something really amazing and special, and they're trying to point out all this great stuff that he did and stuff, and they're like naming all this. And he himself, he doesn't think it's a big deal, but they're trying to make it into a big deal. So he's got parents that actually approve too much and like take too much pride in his accomplishments and stuff. So it shows that there is a flip side to that and how that can be an annoying thing too.
Listen,
It's one thing to desperately seek your parents' approval. It's another thing to have your parents' approval showered on you for every little thing when you didn't even feel like you did anything.
and that's a newer concept too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that definitely would have been a newer
More,
concept at the time.
more inflated now for sure. But listen
Oh,
to
for
all
sure.
the nice things people say about Benjamin. And she's like reading
Yeah.
off
I mean,
what people said about him. He was a nice young man.
I wonder how many more years before like people started getting the bumper stickers that said "My child is an honor student" and all that bullshit. Oh man,
that kind of shit's awful. But no, I was going to mention, Hoffman was going to be in the producers. I think he had a role in the producers.
Oh, that would have been cool.
He had to give up because of this movie.
Yeah. Really enjoy the producers. It was definitely sort of a new, hipper kind of humor that would go in. Mel Brooks, of course, who would then dominate for the next while as far as humor styles. Because it's true that, like, in that movie, but yeah, if we were talking about, and maybe we will touch on a comedy at some point, but if you want to talk about a difference between comedy before versus comedy of the new Hollywood era, it was like, the older comedy was more like hijinks and misunderstandings and stuff like that. Whereas, this new breed of comedy, like we see of the producers, was a lot more subversive. It was a lot closer to the vest and stuff. And, if you want to, and if you want to get into like being edgy and stuff, I mean, it was pretty funny. The concept from the producers, is like this whole thing about making a musical based on the life of Hitler, which, in 1968, I'm sure there were plenty of people going, too soon, man, too soon. Although sometimes I wonder if the concept of too soon existed, given the fact that Hogan's Heroes existed.
Hitler.
Hogan's Heroes, like that show blows my mind that like in like what was it, like the early 60s, they made a lighthearted sitcom about POWs in a Nazi concentration camp where the Nazis were played off as lovable buffoons. Like they were the bad guys, but I mean, can you imagine if they made like some sort of like sitcom now, like based on some like recent war or conflict or something, and made light of like the life of POWs or something? Like, there's no way. So maybe people didn't say too soon for the producers, but still, I mean, at the same time, I don't think they had like swastikas and stuff going on in Hogan's Heroes, where of course they're doing this, and you got a springtime for Hitler, great stuff. But yeah, so that's one of like the major differences. I mean, like I said, maybe we'll get into comedy later and talk about some of the others in Mel Brooks' style. But yeah, usually if you're watching like an older school comedy, say before the 60s, before New Hollywood and stuff, it's usually to do with wacky things or misunderstandings. Man, people of the old days, they love misunderstandings. Like every funny play is always about like somebody mistaking somebody for being somebody else.
Yeah.
Like that's like the joke in like every funny play going back to fucking Shakespeare. It's like, oh, I thought you were somebody else, so I treated this way. I remember there's so many of them that do that. I remember I did this play called this play, I think it was a Russian play called The Government in high school. And like that's the entire premise. It's like this little Russian village and it's kind of falling apart. This inspector's gonna come from the government, the big communist government. And if the town officials can like impress him, fix the place up and stuff like that. And of course some like moron comes, just some guy, and they all think he's the inspector, so they spend the time running around sucking up to him, and he has no idea why and stuff. And when the real inspector comes, they treat him like garbage and stuff. And that's like what happens in like every comedy ever, like beforehand. That's like the main thing. It's like some sort of misunderstanding. Somebody thinks somebody is somebody else or something like that. Like yeah,
that's like every other episode of like a television show, like a sitcom.
Mm-hmm.
Like
it's still funny, and it can still be played out well to this day. But yeah, sure. I mean, it took a while for comedy to evolve beyond that sort of thing, like I said, or just some sort of like wacky hijinks.
Well, I'll be honest, man. There's not a whole lot of comedies I like before the 70s.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. The mark of sort of a good comedy, it stands the test of time. And I found that like that didn't really kick in until the New Hollywood style comedies. Like it's very rare to see some of these like classics, like with say Charlie Chaplin. Sure, like I love The Gold Rush. The Gold Rush is a great movie, really funny for sure and stuff. But I mean that's the creme de la creme and stuff. But I mean there's plenty of stuff that was coming out 30s, 40s, 50s that was supposed to be really funny that nowadays we just like But I really do think, and like I said, hopefully maybe we'll do a comedy as we get into this to talk a little bit more. But yeah, it was really people like Mel Brooks and what was going on in New Hollywood that really started this whole humor that like. I really do think will endure, although I don't know. It's true that maybe another 40, 50 years there'll be another cutoff and there'll have to be another sort of revolution. I don't know. But to this point, yeah, I really think movies started to get really, truly funny in like the late 60s, as we said, the 70s really getting going. Like my favorite comedy two of my favorite comedies are from the 70s. Animal House and Monty Python's and the Holy Grail. Those are like my two favorite comedies ever. They're both from the 70s. Love them.
I was going to say... I immediately thought of like Airplane and Kentucky Fried Movie, stuff like that.
See, Airplane wasn't even necessarily a new radical idea. It was just sort of a better presentation of it, because that kind of humor certainly existed beforehand. They just they just didn't execute it quite the same way. Airplane was great because it just introduced this world where anything could happen. I think was really the hook. Whereas, like, you would see that sort of humor in comedies beforehand, but it wasn't necessarily consistent. It wasn't, sometimes it would be blended in with other humor or something like that, I think. But, yeah, we'll have time to get more into comedic stuff. I mean, this movie counts a little. We're not too off topic because there is comedy in this. But most of the comedy in this is as we said, is sort of awkwardness and social cues and stuff. And it's really... done quite well, carried off quite well. I think most people, I'm sure there's a small minority out there that aren't impressed, but would say that, carried off really well by Dustin Hoffman, how well he carries off the awkwardness between these characters, especially somebody in his position, a younger man dealing with this older generation that's always in his face about this, that, or the other thing, and it all becoming mixed up as he becomes intimately involved with one of them. And some really funny lines for sure.
Well, let me ask you this. What is the last good Mel Brooks movie?
Oh, that is a good question. I'm going to have to look at the list just to refresh myself. Like that he wrote?
Well, yeah, written or directed, I guess.
Okay, let's... He never really fell off as a director for me, to tell you the truth.
Oh, really?
I mean...
I know people really hated the Dracula Dead and loving it.
Yeah, see, I mean, but that was like the last one.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not very good. I agree, but I didn't see a big decline before that. I like Men in Tights. I like Spaceballs.
I like Men in Tights a lot.
Yeah, and Men in Tights, part of it is just wrapped up in my age too. Like, I remember I was too young to see it in theaters, and technically even my sister would have been too young to see it in theaters at the time, but she got in anyway. She only would have been like 11. She was only like 11, but she still got in. We got PG-14 here, not PG-13, and I remember she used to talk to me about it, and it sounded so great. I was all hyped up for it that when I saw it on video, I was just so happy, you know. So some of that just started tied up in like my age and my memories of it and stuff. But you know, I still really get a kick out of it and stuff. I mean, it certainly had some bad moments too. Like, remember when that kid is like, that kid is doing the Home Alone thing where he's just going, ha ha ha, like that's really bad. Like it's really bad.
There's a lot of,
but
like,
I love,
you know, pop culture stuff like rapping and stuff that just does not work anymore.
Although, I mean, I can still smile, like, where it's like, when he like pumps up his shoes, and he like pumps them up. I still smile at that. But yeah, most of it, yeah, the Ninjas, like Carrie Elways, he's really good.
But stuff like that, like, I mean, you know, Young Frankenstein doesn't have a lot of that, so it's not dated, you know, by, you know, pop culture references. So
that was really the one where they really let them go, though, as far as Mel Brooks goes. Like he wouldn't really overload his movies that way.
Yeah.
I mean, Spaceballs was kind of the beginning of it, I guess.
Yeah. And I guess, oh shit, I'm blanking on the name. He just passed away. Gene Wilder was probably a big part of the success of.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, Gene Wilder is just spectacular in The Producers. I mean, so good, so good. Like, yeah. And as we said before when we were talking about the shift and comedy and actors and stuff like that, like that was sort of, again, a new sort of humor brought in by people like Mel Brooks and carried off by actors like a Dustin Hoffman, like a Gene Wilder, like Glasses.
Jerry Lewis?
No, not Jerry Lewis. No, fuck. Dated his daughter.
Woody Allen?
Woody Allen, yeah.
Glasses?
Yeah, I'm sorry, that was the best I could do. But I meant, that sort of neurotic sort of character, that self-deprecating, that awkward, neurotic character. That was really, that was a new thing that they brought in that you weren't going to see in comedies and stuff of, before that.
Well, you were talking about the waspy aspect of it beforehand, and, I really grew up with tons of Jews in Hollywood and, comedy and, all over the place. Most of my favorite directors are Jewish.
Right. But they were all behind the scenes to a certain point, right?
Right.
This was the movement where finally they were getting front and center.
Spielberg and, Woody Allen, folks like that coming out. And,
exactly. But yeah, before that, of course, Jews had a big presence in Hollywood before that too, but it was behind, it was not, they were not the stars and they were not the big names and stuff. They might have even been doing the hard work and stuff. And a lot of people, and there were some powerful ones. Oh, let's start this whole thing about those people that have their crazy conspiracies about Jews and how much they control the world. But it is true that like Jews ran like MGM and stuff.
Well, I mean, yeah, the ones that had smaller
when
noses
I say that,
just changed their names. And
I just meant people that happen to be Jews. When I say Jews, I just mean people who are Jews. I don't mean like the Jews as a group or the Jews, in some sort of, group effort together, all working that like people like to imagine.
Yeah. I mean, it's not I don't think that's a bad thing to say. I mean.
No, I don't think it is either. I'm just saying, like, nowadays, the way that people can twist it is ridiculous because of things like that. Which,
yeah, but
I mean, crackpots is what I mean. So
the Jews control the world. I mean, it's kind of true in a lot of aspects. I mean, I'm not going to go off on a tangent here. I mean, but.
But I guess, yeah, you know what I mean. The people that mean like it's a concentrated effort.
Yeah.
Instead of just like Jews happen to be successful. But anyway, yeah. Hopefully we don't.
Oh, you're talking about some like conspiracy theory type stuff.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Well, this is YouTube. We're not immune to getting the odd person that has such views to comment.
I'm sure we've been called worse.
We had it when we did a fucking commentary on the Sausage Factory about. You remember? It was about Maximum Overdrive, and some guy somehow made a comment that turned it into a bunch of stuff about that.
Wasn't it about white power or something? Or
well, yeah, he was saying like how you don't.
Stuff?
He was saying how like this was a movie that came out in 1986, and he was saying like how back then he's like there's a lot of like blonde-haired, blue-eyed people in there. It's like you don't really see that anymore. And I made it, and I sort of thought he was joking, and I said, "Yeah, I think I'm the only blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy in this whole stupid show. What's going on?" And then he went to a whole thing, and I actually wasted time arguing with him for a bit, which was a waste of time. But he was going on about, about like how, we're all being lied to by the media and stuff, and all this bad stuff that the Jews and the other races are doing and stuff, and blah 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 blah. Yeah, but
that stuff's funny, man.
So it can show up anywhere, so I don't really mind bringing some of that up here, because yeah, we could be talking about something completely unrelated, and one of those crackpots might just show up to spew that stuff because hey, they have to spew it somewhere, and YouTube is a great place to do it. So whatever.
He was talking about some like Helter Skelter type stuff at one point, wasn't he? It's like
I don't know if I followed him that far. There's after I replied to him like twice, and then after that I think I just blocked, so I didn't actually see what he followed up with. I already wasted time replying to him, like because twice I like legitimately argued with him, which is a stupid thing to do. Like you can't argue with these people.
Yeah.
So.
I'm gonna.
But I think it wasn't, and I hate to say it was more an appeal to my own vanity than anything like me being outraged for morality's sake. Because what made me mad and made me take it personally was I don't like people telling me that I'm not well informed when it comes to history, and that was what hit the nerve. So I'm just thinking I've forgotten more about history than you even know, and yet he wants to And there's, those people that talk about how history's been manipulated since, at least World War II by Jews and all this stuff and blah, blah, blah. He was definitely in some of that Holocaust denying.
Oh, man, that's so hilarious.
All the photoshopping those GIs must have done when they were taking pictures at Auschwitz. using their 1940s computers. Or whatever. But
time traveling photoshoppers.
They'll believe anything, I guess. But yeah, I'm glad we did do this movie because it's significant for all the reasons we said, and it's still an enjoyable movie.
Yeah,
the soundtrack is cool. Dustin Hoffman's good. It's had a good glimpse into that world, which was a new thing at the time, as we said. This sort of new generation of disaffected youth. Like people that had like actually advantages and stuff, but how they still had problems too, because now they could feel directionless, or they could just feel a lot of pressure from their parents, etc. And to this day, it's a very real thing. Parents that have a very specific idea or path for their children, that even when their children become adults, they still want to control their lives and make them do this and all that. And all tied up in the middle of that, of course, we have this great this situation of an affair. And yeah, I like the first half. I like the less serious first half more than the more dramatic second half. But I don't think like that ruins the movie or they shouldn't have done it. I'm just saying that's how my enjoyment works. We're getting to the second half. I don't really like it as much, but it is logical, I guess, to a certain degree, how the story, goes on. So I'm not going to criticize that. But I like that more lighthearted side more.
It's just predictable, like you said before. You already knew what was going to happen before you'd even seen it.
Sure. And I mean, there's plenty of movies that are predictable that are still good. Sure. Because of just the way they're done. I mean, I just watched Moonlight yesterday, the movie that won Best Picture, and It's quite predictable. It doesn't do anything new, really, but it's done in a really good way. So It doesn't really break any new ground or anything and stuff. I mean, I guess and I know that sounds weird because it's a movie with like an all-black cast about basically a gay character, so it sounds very cutting edge and new. But no, I've seen this stuff before. But I mean, it is done really well. So and it was quite predictable how it was going to go. It tells the movie in like three 3 sections: when he's like a kid, when he's a teenager, when he's a young man. And by the time it's over, nothing's really happened that it's gonna have like really shocked you or surprised you. And I'm not saying that every movie's supposed to do that anyway. So yeah, so even when movies are predictable, it's not always a bad thing. It just sort of depends upon the execution. Blah blah blah.
Sure.
But yeah, one thing I wanted to mention was the fact that this movie was based on a popular novel, and that the fact is a lot of people don't know is that like some like 40 years later, it didn't come out until 2007, even though I guess it had been written a while ago, a sequel to that novel came out, and it was called Homeschool, and it's friggin' ridiculous. And it tells us that Ben and Elaine are still married, and there's a big plot about how they want their children to be homeschooled, and they actually ask Mrs. Robinson to help them, which doesn't make any goddamn sense. But it has something to do with him being disenchanted with education and a fight against it. Like, it just seems so ridiculous and unnecessary. Like you can't believe it's a real thing. But yeah, it's funny. Like, there's a lot of like classic pieces of like fiction out there that we had no idea have like ridiculous sequels, and this is another one. Like, it's a sequel nobody wanted or asked for, and it in no way released. I haven't read it, but I've just sort of read synopsis of it, and it seems like it has like zero connection to any of the themes or anything from the first. It's just like taking the same characters and putting them in another situation just for the hell of it. I don't think
What's another one of those? I know there's another one that we discussed recently.
Oh, an out of nowhere sequel?
Yeah. Never mind. Sorry.
Yeah,
shit.
I know. Yeah, well, maybe I'll think of one before the next show we do. I'll be able to come up with a cool, because that is sort of an interesting thing that like such things exist. And I'm talking about like unauthorized sequels or anything. I mean sequels by the actual original author too. Because nowadays, there's plenty of stuff that's like public domain and stuff, and you'll see sequels and reimaginings and stuff. God knows how many stuff fucking like fantasy. I don't know if the last time was you like walked down like a children's or teens fantasy section in like a bookstore, but you can like count all sorts of stuff like that's like based on like Alice in Wonderland or Peter Pan or Wizard of Oz. I'm sure you've probably heard of some of the big, like Wizard of Oz, like the story Wicked, right? That's a whole series. There's a whole bunch of books there and stuff. Actually, there's a TV show called Emerald City. I've never seen it, but that's another thing. But yeah, that's all public domain. So anybody who wants to can just take that stuff and do what they want with it, which I'm not saying is wrong. But in many ways, not to go on a tangent, I think we talked about before, but Disney started bringing about the death of that because Disney wanted to make copyrights get renewed so stuff never goes in the public domain, so they can just keep it and keep making money off it. And I see the good side of that, but I also see the bad side of that, because I don't know. I mean, it's true. Like myself as an aspiring author, I could just take something like Tarzan or something and just do what I want with it and try to sell a book that way. But I don't know. I don't really want to do that. But you can.
Why Disney's been making the live action versions of their own stuff, because
it extends the copyright.
Right.
Because there's little rules in there about like new content and stuff like that. And again, this can stimulate something good, but it can also completely stifle it.
Yeah, I don't think giving a time constraint is going to make anything good.
Right.
Like, we got to get this project out before said date.
And it's true that Disney itself has shown that it can take some of its own properties and reimagine them itself and do a good job with it, although it hasn't happened recently. I mean, we talked about this on other shows, particularly the animation show. I'll blather on about the animation renaissance, and part of that being the Disney renaissance. A big part of the Disney renaissance was they took old stuff and repackaged it in a new way. They took some of the old cartoons of the 40s and 50s and the comics of somebody like Carl Barks, and they turned that into DuckTales. They took, the old Chip and Dale shorts, and they made something really weird, Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. They took the friggin' Disney versions of the characters from Jungle Book and made a completely weird show, Tailspin, So, like, they did all these really weird things with existing characters, but they were successful and they were good. So it shows that it's a possible thing. But that was within Disney itself, so they were still reaping the benefits. But so on one hand, they show that it's possible, but on the other hand, they're saying, well, only if we do it. But yeah, there's a big fight that rages on about, whether or not everything should just go into public domain, basically after most authors and creators out there who are on the side of it say, you know, I'm fine with it expiring, you know, within, say, the lifetime of my kids. I like that I can benefit from it, and maybe my kids can benefit from it. After that, whatever. And that seems fair to me. But Disney and people are just like, it should last for all time, you know, meaning like if only this stuff had been in place now, then like Shakespeare, whoever could trace their lineage back to Shakespeare would be like a trillionaire, you know. But whatever. But I mean, it sort of proves, yeah, that like some of our best stuff exists because we didn't have those laws, you know, years and years ago.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I can see, I mean, if you wrote it, you know, it should be yours.
Yeah, I feel like it should be mine, but once I'm dead, fine.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to be doing a lot of complaining.
Yeah.
But, you know, I don't know. I guess I could see both sides of that argument.
But what's hilarious about is the hypocrisy somebody like Disney shows, though, because Disney, for instance, Karl Barks himself, who invented Scrooge McDuck, one of the most popular and enduring characters, you know, nobody knew who the fuck he was while he was a comic because you weren't allowed. If you were a comic book artist in like the 40s, 50s, 60s, your name wasn't anywhere on there. Like that's why he got the nickname the Good Duck Artist, because like he wasn't the only one, but he did like what many fans considered to be the best work. They could recognize his style. They didn't know his name, so they had to call him something and stuff like that. And yeah, I could go on a whole thing because especially with comic books, and you know, if you look up somebody like Jack Kirby and stuff, the whole thing about not having creative control and not getting residuals and not getting the rights. I mean, you look up like the guys that created Superman. What is it? Jerry. Is it Joel? I get their names. Joel and Jerry, anyway. Siegel and whatever his name is. But anyway, those guys, like, in the 1970s, Superman by then was a huge thing, but they were both, like, practically destitute. And it took, like, a whole bunch of, like, at the time, current comic book writers and artists, they, like, they did, like, I don't know, they launched some sort of, like, lawsuit or something to try to get them money so that they wouldn't, like, fucking die. Because one of them, the artist, the Canadian guy, he was the guy that did the drawings. Like, he was going blind, and, like, he couldn't afford any sort of, like, medicine or anything like that. Like, it was just a terrible thing in the mid-'70s. These guys, they created, like, one of the biggest things of the 20th century. Like, they didn't have anything to show for it. Nothing. You know, and it was terrible. So, yeah, it's a really tricky thing, but luckily a lot of people have knocked down the walls and paved the way so that if I ever do actually write anything that gets published, I should be able to benefit from it if it's a successful thing and stuff. And I don't know, it's very easy for me as somebody, and it's all hypothetical, to say I want to do, you know, something like what Bill Watterson, who created Calvin and Hobbes, did, which is not let anybody fucking ever touch it ever. You know, and I'm not talking about public domain. I don't know where he stands on that. Maybe once he dies, he doesn't care. But yeah, Calvin and Hobbes is one of the biggest, you know, it's one of the most acclaimed and successful and just loved comic strips. But I mean, he's like I can't think of anybody more perfect. He did it for 10 years. Then he said, I'm stopping. And that was it. He was done. He did 10 great years and he stopped. And besides that, there isn't a fucking shred of Calvin and Hobbes merch out there because he wouldn't allow it. Not anything. You can't get a t-shirt, a lunchbox, nothing. Because he's like, I'm not doing that. I'm not having my stuff turned into some sort of product that you stick on everything. And, you know, they would say, well, okay, how about you just allow like a plush Hobbes? Kids would have that. And he's like, nope, it's all or nothing. That's a slippery slope. No, nothing. So, and I just respect the hell out of that because he's been successful, but he could have made so much more money if he did, and he didn't do it. And I don't know if I probably never will be in that position, but I don't know if I was ever in the position I would have that sort of integrity. Because on the one hand, yeah, you know, somebody like me, I'm all uppity. Oh, I don't want to see my stuff commercialized. But on the other hand, money, lots of money, just coming in all the time. You know, it's hard to turn that kind of shit down.
Totally.
I mean, one of my other favorite comic strips went the complete opposite way. I love Garfield, but it went on way too long. Garfield should have stopped by 2000 at the latest. Garfield should have ended.
Absolutely.
And Garfield is on every fucking thing in the world. It's on underwear, lunchboxes, everything. And they've made two awful live action movies that just completely insult it, you know. So they're just complete opposites as far as that goes. I love both comics, but one to me was done the right way. I don't want to come down on Jim Davis. I'm sure he's a great guy. I'm not going to say, oh, you're just a money whore, you know, anything like that. You know, I'm not you. I wasn't in your position. And like I said, in that position, I can totally see why the appeal and the security you can get out of it.
What's your status on Garfield and Friends?
I thought it was a really cool show. I thought that actually captured the spirit well, and maybe that was one of the things that softened him on it. Like he thought that was well done. Like that is the voice I hear in my head when I read the Garfield comics. Love the voice.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Garfield and Friends does introduce some wackiness that is not in the comics, but I still enjoy anyway. Like it's still pretty funny.
Oh yeah.
But yeah.
Shit, I was going to say something, but I forgot what it was.
I've been on a real duck. I've been on a real duck kick lately, doing the Karl Barks and the later. Yeah, and while Karl Barks had his struggles, Dan, is it Dan Rosa or Don Rosa? You think I would know, but Dan Rosa, the modern guy, the fanboy that did the stuff in the 80s and 90s, it was the same thing. Like, they were like there were publishers, smaller publishers under the Disney umbrella. They were releasing like collections of his work with his name right on it that he didn't see a dime for. Like he'd go to some country and they'd have like hardcovers of his work and it would say right on it like Dan Rosa collection, and he'd had no idea it existed and he wouldn't be getting paid a penny for it and stuff. And it all had to do with like the convolution of the fact that he was working under the Disney umbrella, and unlike somebody like Barks, where it was even worse, he didn't create new characters. He worked specifically in the realm of using other people's characters. Now it's not like he wasn't creative or anything like that, but so he didn't have anything technically of his own anyway. But yeah, so it was weird for him because those books were all his work. I mean, not just his work. Those as comics were always bigger in Europe than America. Period. Like they were always well received here, but it was way bigger in a place like Europe. So he would like go on like tours there to like do book signings and stuff. And like the people he'd meet in places like Finland and Germany and stuff, they would think he was a millionaire. And he wasn't anywhere close to that, and they didn't understand that because they didn't know all those details and stuff. So he'd find that really kind of confusing, and it would bother him. He couldn't blame them. It's not like it was their fault and stuff. But yeah. But anyway, that's a whole thing.
Yeah, Bill Watterson's a lot younger than I thought he was.
Yeah, he got started when he was pretty young.
Man, I was reading those comics young. I was so young. I mean, like 5,
Yeah, I love that. To me, it's the greatest comic strip ever. It'll be a long time before somebody surpasses it.
I always wanted to buy the books I guess it was just, compilations of the strips.
Yeah, I got the books. You can get a set. You can get the complete Calvin and Hobbes set.
Oh, really?
And I got that, and I got a good deal on that too. I got that for half price from Costco. Like it's usually over $100. I got it for like 50. So. Yeah,
I remember.
Not the hard. I got the soft cover, not the hardcover. So I mean, I have everything. I have those anyway, but then I have the ones that like the number, not the small ones, but I have all 4 of the long ones. I have those, and I'll have to show all this stuff off at some point.
Yeah,
my own channel and stuff. But yeah,
but it was always so expensive. I remember that. Like I always wanted to buy the books that. I'm sure these are what would have been the older ones, that came out years ago, but.
Well, I mean, the thing about that is, yeah, like I was reading as a kid too, because for people who don't know, I've always been reading comics. I didn't become a serious collector until I was about 19. But the truth is, I did even before that. I did own a few of the Calvin and Hobbes collection even before that because I liked them even as a kid. Before I was a big comics person, I already did own them. They were things I legitimately wanted and stuff. Because yeah, like most of the comics and stuff I own, I got like basically as an adult. Mm-hmm. Even if I'd been reading it earlier, I didn't own it then. But some of the Calvin and Hobbes I own as a kid, like I got as a kid, and I've kept them in pretty good shape, luckily.
Yeah,
I think the first one I got was the Homicidal Jungle Cat. I got Homicidal Jungle Cat when I was probably like 11. So I think it had only just like come out then. Like it was like brand new when I got it, I think. But yeah, those are really great.
I used to love that, and of course, Garfield and the oh shit, I just had it on the tip of my tongue. Gary Lawson.
Oh yeah, the Far Side.
Far Side, yeah.
That's like the holy trinity for me, man.
Oh, man.
I love those.
I know, like every year I'd get a calendar, and you get to tear off and see a different strip on every day.
That's something I still don't own to this day, though. I don't have any Far Side of my own. Okay. I grew up in a household where we had some for the family, and my sister had one. Yeah. My sister had this really great book that was like also like had like stuff that he wrote about his life and stuff. And he had some captions about things. And some of the mistakes. There's this really, I don't know if you remember because there's so many, but he wrote about, okay, so there was this, what, you know, they're all, almost all of them are single panel. And all it is, it's a city shot and a whole crowd screaming and running in terror toward us. And behind them and over them is a UFO with the aliens chasing them down. And the aliens' caption is, "Yee-haw!" like that, right? That's the joke, right? But he pointed out that, like, once when he was having that, like, when he first put that out, in several papers, because, like, they're doing papers all over the country, in several papers, they made a typo where instead of they're saying "yee-haw," they just say "yee," where it's just "yee," which just completely changes the comic because
It's kind of funny too, though.
because it's just like, is that like what the crowd is saying, or is, you know, like, it just completely changes everything. There was more stuff from that too, but that's the one I remember most. That's really funny.
That was like such on the nose, like dark humor stuff that I just love.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. He's one of my favorite artists for, like, doing the whole crap sack world thing.
Yeah.
Where he just shows, like, how bad the world can be. Another one,
Yeah.
a more recent one is somebody like Yonan Vasquez, who did most famously, sorry, it's not Yonan, it's Jonan Vasquez, who most famously did Invader Zim, but all of his stuff is sort of like crap sack world. But way before that was Gary Lawson, with his, like, unattractive, stupid people and stuff like that, and, you know, people being.
It's so relevant still.
Oh, you know, awesome! Yeah, you want to talk about, like, timeless humor and stuff? That's right there. The school for the gifted and the kid pushing on the pull door, you know, all that stuff.
I know when you know, Lawson quit doing that strip, or at least they quit doing it, you know, weekly for the paper. I think it was just in the Sunday paper here. You know, I would read it, you know, religiously every week, so I was really upset. But we got to vote on what strip that was going to come in and replace it, and Close to Home won that. I don't know if you're familiar with Close to Home by John McPherson.
It does sound familiar, but I couldn't really say.
It's really similar in the I guess context, and you would probably recognize the artwork too. It's got a really a distinctive style to it.
You know, one of the ones that's considered like a big seminal work that ran through the 80s that's, like, endlessly praised that I've read, like, none of was Bloom County. Did you ever read Bloom County?
Very rarely I did.
Because that's like one that's always pointed to as, like, really good, and it never ran in any paper that I got. Like, I don't know if it showed up in Canada or not, or just, but yeah, it's one of the ones that is, like, a lot of people, like, even people not just do strips that just do comics in general, say, like, it was a really big influence on them, blah blah blah.
Oh yeah.
Apparently that guy started up again in 2015.
Really? Looking at some of the others, like Doonesbury, I used to love a lot.
Yeah.
That was one that was kind of politically.
That was the really political one stuff. I mean, I used to read it when I was a kid and not understand most of it, but I wanted to.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Well, what I read was what was there, basically.
Yeah, the same here. Like, Gilbert was there.
Like a Crankshaft. I don't know if you guys
really old. No, I don't know that one, but I knew some of the really old ones, like Hagar the Horrible, High and Lois.
Yeah.
I had some Family Circus books for some reason.
Yeah, those were always kind of like.
I used to think the mom from Family Circus was pretty hot.
She's blonde, right?
No, dark hair.
Oh, really? Okay. I'm thinking of Blondie, I think, from
Blondie and Dagwood, yeah. There's another old one. Yeah. Well, I remember all those from the newspaper. But for whatever reason, Bloom County was never around. So, but it was, again, years later when I was reading about, you know, famous cartoonists and stuff, and somebody like Bill Watterson and stuff like that. And it's like Bloom County was always a big presence. I was like, I've never read any of Bloom County. And
Bloom County, yeah. It looks like the same. It almost looks like oh shoot, another one of the comics that is still out today. The strips.
I'm completely lost. The last, like, newish one I liked was one that came out ages ago. It was called Zits. That was about the teenage kid.
Yeah.
My mom was always, like, showing that to me, saying how much it was like me. I was like, oh, come on, I'm not that
bad. Or like Kathy. Did you ever get Kathy?
Oh, God. And, like, I mean, I know it's probably expected for somebody, you know, a 30-something male to like.
I hate Kathy.
Yeah, but I mean, I hated it as a kid too. I promise.
Yeah, I
I
did
hated
too.
it. I hated it before it was cool. Like it was just like the same sort of jokes over and over again.
Yeah.
It was like that, you know.
Like
I don't
just
know. It must be a comic that drives feminists nuts, right? Feminists probably
yeah.
wouldn't like that because it's just like her like freaking out and having body issues and never being able to get a date, right?
It's
Like
like an
those are
Amy
her main
Schumer
things.
routine.
Like it has nothing to do with like how well she does her job or anything like that. It's like that she thinks she's too fat or ugly and that she can't like get a guy to go out with her. And
No,
that,
if anything, her body issues make her not be able to do her job. She's always having to like leave work and stuff.
there you go. I can't even remember the gist of it anymore. But yeah.
No, but like I said, you know, I read it because that's all I had.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, I read it too.
You know.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I read what was over there, like you said.
Oh, Kathy, you want that damn piece of pie, don't you? Wonder what kind of hijinks you're going to get into next week.
You know, the only thing that like Kathy did that was sort of like unique was like for here was like something that's in manga is like showing characters like sweat and cry and stuff. And she's like the only like American strip I know that would do that.
Always.
Unless you count like Peanuts, but because that would have some crying, but still. You know, Peanuts is like considered this great masterpiece. I only like the Peanuts animations. I don't really care about the strip.
I didn't like
I think the animations are beautiful and not all of them. I mean, the real classics. I mean, they made a whole bunch since and stuff, but you know, like and some of them aren't even that old. Like I don't mean really old. Like I love Charlie Brown's New Year, which is like late 80s, I think, and I think that's a great one. It's like one of the most existentially depressing things you'll ever see. I love it. Like it never holds back. It even has like it ends. It starts bad. It's bad in the middle. It's bad in the end. He just loses the whole time. It's just wham, wham, wham. He's just getting hit in the face. I just love his New Year. It's so depressing, and I love its honesty for that. Like it has its little moments, like the dance scene and stuff like that. But yeah, like he has to like read War and Peace over the break. Everything goes wrong socially, and then in the end, the whole thing that caused the thing was that he had to write the paper War and Peace. He gets like a D on it or something. Like it's just awful start to finish. But yeah, I never really cared about the strip. I mean, I get the point of the strip. It was this. Here's little children in their little social lives, but they'll act and say things that are like part of the adult convention. Isn't that mind blowing? You know? And okay, fine. Still, I love Charles Schultz. He was an American treasure. He was great.
I mean, even as a kid, though, I didn't like the strip. It was just never.
No.
You know, I read it, but not like I looked forward to it.
It wasn't very lively.
Yeah.
It was too low key. I felt like some of the life came to it in the animations. Love the animations. Yeah. Again, there's been some bad animations, and I don't know who the fuck they got to do his voice in the 70s, but it's awful. Any of the animations in the 70s, Charlie Brown's voice is terrible. I was so happy when they did that movie like a year or two ago.
Yeah.
Not only was it like stay true to the roots and they didn't try to like modern it up, but whoever they got to do his voice was really good and sounded like Charlie Brown again. Some really weird people have done voices for that. Of course, I'll have to look that up too because now I can't remember. But like somebody really weird did Peppermint Patty like in the 90s or something.
Really?
Yeah, like somebody really weird. Like I'm used to Peppermint Patty having that really, you know, gruff, unfeminine sort of voice. But you can see animations in like I think the 80s and 90s where it's a completely different voice. It really changes the spirit. But anyway, we've done a few tangents now. I guess we should wrap up in the we've gone all over the place with our thing about the creative control and copyright and all that stuff.
We started at comedy and wound up talking for at least 30 minutes about comic strips.
Yeah, well, that's what you get. Yeah. You guys knew what you guys knew what you were getting into when you started watching the show, and we thank you for it. But yeah, we will mercifully wrap up here. We haven't decided again exactly what the show will be next week, but we're still doing New Hollywood. Obviously, we're still doing it. But I can tell you at least tentatively, it's probably something early 70s, where where the movement has really hit the ground running now, and some of the best stuff is coming out. And yeah, so we'll probably do at least 1 or 2 movies early 70s for sure. And so that's where we're at, and we will let you know. We'll do an announcement in a couple days on Twitter to give you a bit of a heads up. Sorry that we're not more organized, but yeah, we'll be able to get our act together and be able to get the next 2. We'll see what we can get done here. But yeah, The Graduate, seminal movie in a lot of ways, big impact on pop culture, et cetera, et cetera. Let us know what you thought about it, or when you first saw it, or what you thought of it then, or if your thoughts on it have changed. Mine have. I appreciate it more now. than I did years ago. I like it more than I did. There's still definitely movies from that era that I prefer to it, but I respect it for what it did for sure.
Sure. Yeah, but I kind of feel the same way. When I saw this, it was really just kind of a checklist type movie, one I had to see because it's talked about so much. And, that's pretty much how I feel about it. I respect it a lot, but it's not really something I'm going to go, track down to watch very often. But, I do think it's a well-made movie. Of course,
for sure.
Dustin Hoffman,
yeah,
long,
and I watched his career. Yeah. So always be significant for that reason, for sure. Yeah. And Dustin Hoffman, Simon and Garfunkel, these are the takeaways and stuff. And
young boys' sexual fantasies, I think, were never the same after.
Yeah. Because it's true though, because the movie sort of posits as like, how awkward would this be if you a neighbor, an older friend, and it's like, but a lot of, like you said, a lot of guys coming out of the movie probably thought, oh, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
I wish that would happen to me. That'd be great.
Oh yeah.
I didn't really grow up with too many hot neighbors, older neighbors anyway. We'll say. I never went through that awkward period that a lot of guys go through, where like one of their moms is hot.
Yeah.
Not really. No. Not really, or not that I noticed anyway.
Yeah, me either.
But that is a real thing for many males growing up, that they got that friend that has a mom that's got a bit of it going on.
Maybe a sister, maybe a hot sister.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that I really too. But hot for teacher.
Yeah.
Got it bad. Yeah, I had some decently attractive teachers. I never had a crush on a teacher either.
I didn't really either. It's yeah.
I had to make up for some of these things later in life. What can I say? Yeah. I know we're wrapping up, but yeah, I guess the other thing that's more progressive, I guess, about that movie and stuff too was like one of the first movies around, where we're starting to show like relationships that were sort of outside what was considered, the normal convention and stuff too. It was an illicit affair, but it also led to sort of a real relationship, but also a really kind of weird, flawed one where, I think in older movies, relationships were a little more straightforward in how they were played, boyfriend, girlfriend, man and wife type thing. And this sort of got going where it was a little skewed and off the board and stuff. Although, again, much more true to life, which is true too. I've known a few people where their dating life has sort of been like that, but that has not been my dating life. And I've had, not for too much information, but I've had a dating life, but I've also had a sex life that's not a dating life and stuff, and that's a reality just for a lot of people and stuff. And this movie sort of shines a bit of a light on that kind of mysterious world for some people. And but nowadays, again, there's nothing shocking or strange about it, but within the historical context, etc. and stuff. But yeah, we've gone on at some length, so good time to wrap up, but thanks a lot for watching. We will give you a heads up for sure on what the next movie in our new Hollywood series will be. Again, thinking early 70s for sure, something maybe one of those gritty type movies. We'll see where we go. We will let you know. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next week.
All right, from the Pod Convention, we'll have a good night, and we will see you soon. Peace out.